Okay, welcome. We have representatives from all of the major funding agencies here today to talk about money, and everybody likes to talk about money. So without further ado, we are going to turn it over to our first presenter, and that will be David Cheek with USDA Rural Development. So David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning to everybody. Again, as Liz stated, my name is David Cheek, and I'm with USDA Rural Development. Next slide, please.
I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Is everybody seeing David's screen? Liz, can you see David's screen? Okay.
Yes, we can see it now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you're good.
So this morning, as Liz kind of indicated, I am here on behalf of USDA Rural Development, and we're going to be talking about some of our options for funding in our water and environmental programs. Next slide, please. So kind of our primary program within the Rural Utility Service that USDA utilizes to fund water and wastewater projects is the Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program that can be used to improve infrastructure, support public health and safety, and also promote economic. Next slide, please. Again, as you can see there, the main purpose is to provide financing for water, sewer, sanitary sewer, solid waste disposal, and other wastewater, stormwater facilities for rural residents. Primarily, what we see here in Missouri is funding for water and sewer projects, even though we do have the option to use this funding for some other programs, solid waste and stormwater. Those are not as popular here in Missouri. They're a little bit tougher to have a solid revenue stream to support loan repayment. Eligibility for applicants, we're looking at public bodies, municipalities, cities, towns, villages, other counties, your water districts, your sewer districts, some nonprofit corporations, federally recognized Indian tribes, and then you know, we examine the project all along from the very beginning, clear through underwriting to make sure that the project is feasible. This program is limited to populations of 10,000 or less, with a higher priority given to those smaller communities under 5,500. Next slide, please. So what can our funds be used for? They can be used to construct, enlarge, extend, or otherwise improve water or waste disposal facilities. They can be used to pay for any necessary other costs, such as legal fees, engineering costs, easement type of fees, land acquisition, rights of way, permitting. We can utilize some of our funding to purchase necessary equipment. We do try to be careful on that. You know, we take a very close look at that equipment to ensure that it is necessary for the successful operation of the system. And then also it can be used to help pay for any environmental costs that there may be. Next slide, please. Loan terms. So here in Missouri, we do not regularly, it's not our practice to do a grant only. Okay. We will, any project that is presented to us, we'll have a loan component. Okay. So that's going to require a few things. Typically the security instrument on projects that we do is a revenue bond, either a water revenue bond or a sewer revenue bond, or it could also be a combination bond. So Missouri statutes do limit public body revenue bonds to 35 years. So that is the term that we use on our loans, is 35 years. And according to our regulations, non-for-profit corporations, we can look at up to 40 years on that. Interest rates, we are kind of in a rising interest rate environment. You can kind of see the rates below there. Those are good. Our rates adjust quarterly, and those are good until March 31st. Right down there, we have a 3-level interest rate structure: poverty, intermediate, and market. And that is determined by your median household income of the service area for the project. Okay. Poverty rate is determined by the median household income. There's kind of a calculation there. Needs to be less than 80% of the current statewide non-metropolitan MHI. That is a figure that is set by our national office. So if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us for that figure. And completion of the project must be able to address a health or sanitary standard. So, and then the project would be eligible for the poverty rate of interest. Currently, we are using the 2006 to 2010 American Community Survey median household income figure. That information is out on the Census Bureau website. If you're curious what maybe your municipality or your service area's MHI might be, I think there might be some plans to adjust that as we get deeper into the 2020s. We did have a 2020 census, and so it does take a while for some of our folks at the national office level to get all that information processed. But we are expecting to adjust that data set maybe potentially on October 1st of 2023. So there is still time to get an application in utilizing current median household income and again the 2010 census data for population. Next slide, please. I did briefly talk about this already, but the security that we typically use on our loans for public bodies is a revenue bond. General obligation, or sometimes referred to as GO bonds, can be taken, but we do really have to meet a test for credit on those, as general obligation bonds are generally seen by the commercial market as kind of Cadillac security. And so if those were being offered by an applicant, we would have to really make sure that there weren't any other commercial lenders that would be interested in purchasing those bonds and funding the project. So loans to our not-for-profit corporations, again, we don't do that very frequently. We only have like 2 of them, maybe 3 of them in our current portfolio right now in Missouri, but those would be secured by promissory note and deed of trust. Next slide, please. Will I get a grant? So this is the $100,000 question. And so I know everybody likes that grant money. Everybody, a lot of folks are on this call today because they maybe didn't get awarded ARPA grant funds. And so I'm happy everybody's on the call because we want to make sure and get the information out there. I can't say right up front to any applicant or any potential applicant if you would get a grant. I could tell you if your service area is eligible, but we do a complete underwrite of the file. First of all, to determine the maximum amount of loan that an applicant can afford and still have reasonable user rates. So here in Missouri, reasonable user rates our policy is that the user rates as a percentage of median household income is at least 2% of the median household income per user per month. And that's for that would be for an average amount of residential usage. Our staff in the field will work with you to collect some usage information to determine what the average residential use is. And then again, we'll back into that and we'll do that 2% calculation. So your rates would have to be at 2% before you would be eligible to receive any grant funds. And so, unfortunately, USDA Rural Development did not receive any additional funding through a lot of these COVID era programs that came through Congress. And so we are still kind of operating on our normal pool of monies. And as everybody knows, grant funds are typically very, very tight. So they are reserved for kind of the most needy of situations and most needy applicants. Again, grant funding is considered gap financing after all other available funds would be used. We do look at any available funding from the applicant in the form of an applicant contribution. We look at maybe community development block grant, who I believe you'll be hearing from later this morning. Sometimes they are we're able to partner with them on projects. And then also we would fill in with we would utilize our rural development loan funds. Then if there is still a gap in financing, then we would consider rural development grant funds. I do want to go ahead. Next slide, please. So how do I start? Where do we, if today is the first time you've ever heard of rural development, or maybe not, where do you get started? Just because you didn't get ARPA money doesn't mean that you still don't have work to do. So kind of the first things first is we're going to need a preliminary engineering report to take a look at the kind of how the system is and maybe what needs there are out there on the system. So we would recommend that you get in touch with a project engineer and kind of or begin working through the process of putting out a request for qualifications, RFQ, or an RFP, request for proposal, and get a professional engineering company on board. I want to kind of pause here for a minute. So rural development does have a couple of programs out there where we do have some funding available, not a large amount of funding, but we do have some funding available that can help the neediest of communities with the cost of preparing a preliminary engineering report. One of them is called our SEARCH grant, SEARCH, and that grant program has a maximum grant amount of $30,000. It is 100% grant funds. There is no applicant contribution, no match needed, no match required with that program. And it is reserved for those communities under 2,500 population and where the median household income is below 80% of our statewide non-metropolitan MHI. So again, to figure that out, that might be something you contact us about. But that is one program that's available. We also have another program called our Pre-Development Planning Grant, or PPG, and that program also will pay for up to $30,000 for a preliminary engineering report. It will pay 75% of the cost. It does have a 25% match requirement. And so, of course, a lot of people like our SEARCH grant, but please know the PPG is out there as well. It's a wonderful option to get a lot of preliminary engineering report paid for. The population limit on that does get increased to 10,000. And so it's open to more communities than the SEARCH grant is. But I just wanted to touch on those real quick before we moved on. So During the preparation of the PER, it kind of needs to be a all hands on deck effort. So, have your engineer come out to your community to help you prepare your plan. And you want to look, 5 or 10 years down the road, even not just for the immediate needs. And so that way you kind of get a better overall picture of what needs are out there on the system. We would encourage you to, the applicant that is, to take steps to get to know your system and know if it works. I know a lot of the times, maybe the board or the city council or something, they may not be quite as in tune with things as the operators are, but this is their system. And so we would highly encourage you to get to know your system. Learn if it's making you or costing you money. You've got to run the system like a business. If you don't run the system like a business, it's not a good thing. Okay. And so, you certainly wouldn't run a business long term that's losing money. And so you certainly need to be on top of those rates. The last bullet point here on this slide says raise rates to keep things in line so you don't pass the burden on to somebody else. This is a little bit of a soapbox for me, and so I will take the opportunity this morning to get on that soapbox. But we would highly encourage everybody to please keep a very close eye on your rates. If you are not raising rates regularly, we would encourage you to do so. Small incremental automatic rate increases should be something that you're discussing with your board or your council. It will make the time whenever you do have to do improvements to the system, it will make it easier. I know nobody wants to pay higher water and sewer rates. I don't want to pay higher water and sewer rates, but infrastructure projects like these are very costly. And I know I may be preaching to the choir a little bit this morning, but folks, typically will react a little better to smaller increases over time than they will to getting into a situation where you may have to double or triple your water or sewer rates in 1 or 2 years. Okay. And so please make sure you're raising your rates on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So what else? And I know we're this morning we're with Missouri Rural Water Association. We thank them again for the opportunity to be here this morning and to present to everybody. But what else could your community need? USDA Rural Development. We kind of pride ourselves in being the only federal agency that is out there that can help build a community from the ground up, as we like to say. So next slide, please. Through our community facilities program, we can assist with a variety of things, as you see on your screen there in front of you. We can help provide financing for police vehicles and equipment, any type of first responder vehicles, first responder equipment, hospitals, health clinics. We're very large into the healthcare industry, libraries, just all sorts of things. We are able to help provide city halls. We certainly can be a part of that. So we'll help provide financing for the pipes in the ground all the way up to city hall and a lot of those other things there. So next slide, please. And with that, next slide. So we do have, here's kind of a general map of where our rural development offices are. A lot of you are probably familiar with your USDA offices. I believe there's a USDA office in almost every county in the state, except for probably some of the very metropolitan areas. Offices that have a rural development presence are listed by a dot on your map there. Our state office is in Columbia. And we do have kind of our area offices as indicated by the black dots there with the circles, the white circle around them. So we have staff, we have rural development presence, rural development staff in all of those offices. And so in addition to contacting me for any type of question at all, you can also reach out to your local rural development community programs point of contact. Next slide, please. Oh, there's some contact information. The phone number there is our state office line number that will get routed to one of the community program specialists in our state office. It might be me, it might be one of the other community program specialists we have there. You can certainly visit our website. We would encourage you to connect with us on Twitter. We're very active on Twitter, also on Gov Delivery. So sign up on Gov Delivery and connect with us on Twitter to make sure you're getting a lot of the most up-to-date information that's out there. Liz, I know, are we taking questions now? Or are we going to take questions at the end?
No, we'll take questions now. If
Okay.
anyone has a question, you can type it in the chat box, or you can just unmute and ask. So you can do that now, or at the end, you want to stay around. At the very end, we're going to have all of the presenters in one room and do a roundtable. So if you can't think of anything right now, you'll have your chance there at the end of all the presentations to ask the panel, I guess. So do we see any questions in the chat box? I don't see any. But David, I do have a couple of things just for clarification for you. So, on the interest rates, can you clarify, because there's a process, I know you apply and you get the letter of conditions, which means we've set the money aside for you if you meet all these things. But then there's closing that can be quite a while down the road. So is the interest rate determined at the time of award, or is it at the time of closing? Because with the current environment, that can be a big difference in the interest rate.
Sure. Yeah. And thank you. That's a great question. So our interest rate would be the lower of the time of obligation. Okay. Which is, like Liz kind of said, when we kind of set the money aside for your project officially, or at the time of actual loan closing. So that would be after the project is constructed and the project is essentially substantially complete. That would be, and we're ready to actually close on the loan and begin the repayment process. It would be the lower of those two times, Liz.
Okay, so that's a benefit.
Correct.
Because that could be a year or more between those two dates.
Yes.
Or a lot of times it's longer than that. So and in this environment, that can be a big difference in interest rates. On the poverty and MHI determination, cities, that's probably pretty easy to determine. But what about a water district? I mean, how would a water district determine that, or does your office help them determine that? Because there's no set boundary as far as census.
Right. Yeah. So our staff would work very closely with the applicant, the water district or the sewer district, as you mentioned. We would probably we would be asking them for a service area map, okay, of their district, and then we would calculate that median household income of the district. We would take that back and utilize some census data, the census data that was most appropriate and also most advantageous to the applicant, whether that's county level data or township level data. A lot of times we're using township level data when we on a water district, especially if they can just cover a portion of a county. So we would take care of that with some basic input about their boundaries from the applicant, from the water district.
Okay, that's helpful to know, because that kind of gets confusing when you try to determine that. So, okay. Let me think. I had another one. Okay, so we have a question in the chat box. Where are the best places to find out what grants could be available to small water districts, www sites? Well, and that was Eric asked that. So, Eric, I mean, this webinar that you're on is probably one of the best sources to find where those grants are, and understanding that there's the chances, like David mentioned earlier, the chances of getting 100% grant for a project are slim to none. So you're probably looking at some type of a loan, but and Joan is going to, from DNR Financial Assistance Center, is going to talk about the SRF program. But like David's group and Joan's group, they will sit down with you and help you determine, you know, what type of grant funds your project would be eligible for. Correct, David? I mean, you guys would just work with them and see what you need to do.
Yeah. I mean, you know, again, we would have to get some additional or some kind of initial information about the project, about the rates, about the service area. You know, we totally maximize the loan that the community is able to support, again, with those rates being at least 2% of the median household income. But then, yes, well, there is a possibility that we can backfill with grant, and we would keep the applicant totally in the loop on that and be advising them of what kind of potential grant funds we might be going for on their project.
Another thing I wanted to point out too, and David, you can embellish on this, I guess, is that sometimes USDA Rural Development also works with the other funding agencies to fully fund a project. I mean, you've had projects where it's USDA funds and block grant funds and even DNR funds all on one project to get it funded to where it's affordable. Correct? I mean, you guys do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I'll let Joan embellish a little bit more on maybe some of those options there. Recently, DNR, we haven't been able to partner with DNR maybe as much as we have in the past. I'm sure that's probably due to some of their programs that they have, but again, Joan will have to elaborate on that a little bit more. But no, we absolutely do have the ability to partner with other agencies. We can even partner with, you know, other federal agencies potentially. EPA, I know, does a lot of projects, and so we would certainly be willing to take a look at that, partnering with EPA. Probably our most prominent partner is CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, who I believe you'll also be hearing from later today. And so I won't steal any of their thunder either.
Okay. And yeah, and the point I was making is that, you know, it's kind of a team effort between the city or the entity, the system, and the engineer, and then the funding people. You know, they will work to get a package that's affordable for you. So, okay, we do have another question in the chat, David.
Okay.
Do you have to get an interim loan to make your improvements completed? Then the USDA closes out their permanent loan for 35 years.
So that is correct. Rural development does require what we call interim financing or construction financing on any loan amount above $500,000. And nowadays, most all of our loans are above $500,000, given the price and the complexity of infrastructure projects such as the type that we're kind of talking about today. So yes, how that would work is that there would be kind of a preliminary closing, we call it, and that would give an applicant access to those construction funds to actually do the project, pay contractors, etc. And then at the end of the project, possibly a little bit before, but most of the time we're nearing the very end of the project. rural development will come in and take out or pay off that interim lender and close our loan so that you're then on the 35-year long-term financing.
And do you work with the city or the entity, the system, to obtain that interim financing? I mean, is that usually done through a private company, like we're going to have DA Davidson here later? How is it usually done?
So Missouri Rural Development, we work very closely with an entity called the Missouri Public Utility Corporation, MPUC, and we have a partnership with them to provide that interim financing. So the answer is yes. We work with the applicant. We have a very smooth process with that other entity, with the MPUC. And we've kind of got it down to a science now. We've worked through several of them over the last we've worked through lots of projects over the last about 4 or 5 years. So
okay, very good. So that's generally not a huge issue.
Nope,
then
not a problem.
it's just part of the process. So good. Okay, so I hope that answered your question, Dennis. Does anybody else have any questions for David? Okay, I'm not seeing any. David will be around for our roundtable at the end. So if you think of anything else, write them down and bring them up at the roundtable. So thank you, David.
Great.
Appreciate
Thank you
your
so
time.
much.
All right. Okay, I think we're going to switch speakers now. And a couple of things while they're doing that. Some of you have been on our webinars before, so I can tell. Because you've already put your certification number in the chat box. So we always ask everybody at some point in the webinar to go to the chat box and type in your certification number. That's just another way we can document that you attended for our records. So we ask that you go into the chat box right now and type in your cert number. If you don't have a cert number, just put in zeros, just so we know you're there. It's just a thing to check on attendance, okay? Let me look. I think there's a couple of you, or there was, yeah, that are just in on phone numbers. So you can go in and change your name, and we need a name. If you're calling in on a phone number, click the 3 dots beside your name on the attendance and then type in a name, because we don't know who you are by just the phone number. And that could be a problem when we send the report to DNR for credits, if you need certification credits. Okay. So again, put your cert number in the chat box. So, and then if you're a phone number, go in and rename, go to the participant list, just click on participants, find your phone number, hit the 3 dots beside the name and click rename and type your name in. Okay. So, okay. We are ready for the next presenter. And then after Joan gets done, we will take a break. Okay. So, because I know Joan's got a lot of information for everybody. So, Andy, are we ready with Joan yet?
We're just about there.
Okay. Right.
I was going to also let you know, if somebody is just contacting us via phone, they won't be able to get credit because they can't see any of this and they can't change their name.
Okay.
So if you're joining us solely by phone, we don't really have any way of knowing who you are other than your phone number. So
yeah, so that's an issue as far as the credit, but you get the information.
But you can still get the information, correct? Okay, I'm going to switch microphones and switch videos, and then we'll get on with Joan Deerhoff's presentation.
All right, so just give us a few seconds here, people, and we'll be on in a second. Okay, we can see you, Joan. We're good. All right. So Andy's got to share your PowerPoint and we'll be good to go. Okay, everything looks good.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Liz and Andy. My name is Joan Deerhoff. I'm the Clean Water Coordinator Unit Chief in the Department of Natural Resources Financial Assistance Center. So I'm here on behalf of the department to talk about the funding options we have for Missouri communities. As Liz said, there's a lot to cover, so just bear with me. Next slide. So currently we do have the state revolving fund SRF programs, primarily loan programs. I'm going to go through these all in more detail later on through the presentation, but this is just a high level view. So for our loan programs, we have the Clean Water SRF loan, and then we have the Drinking Water SRF loan. With the Clean Water SRF loan, we have a loan with an affordability grant, and then a low interest loan with a water quality incentive grant. For drinking water, we have a loan with affordability grant, a loan with a regional connection grant, and a planning design interim loan, and a loan with lead service line replacement grant. We do have some 100% grant programs, some regarding the new Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Act that was passed in November 2021, and others that we have just already had been developed in Financial Assistance Center. So the Clean Water Regionalization Incentive Grant was already developed earlier, and the ones from the bill funding are the Clean Water Emerging Contaminants Grant, the Drinking Water Emerging Contaminants Grant. And then finally, we have our ever popular engineering report grants for both clean water and drinking water to help a system develop a facility plan to look at recommended improvements. And we have the Clean Water Integrated Management Plan grant. Again, this is in a nutshell what we have, but I will go into all these more detail. Next slide, please. So what is a state revolving fund if you've never heard of us before? So we are, a partnership between EPA and the states. It was established by Congress in the 1990s to provide states with a mechanism to offer a sustainable source of low-cost financing for drinking water, wastewater, and water quality projects such as stormwater. EPA provides the annual capitalization grant to the department. It's provided to communities as the low interest loans and grants for projects. As the loans are repaid, the principal is recycled into new loans and the interest is used to meet the matching requirements for the next capitalization grants. And I'll show you how you can save the money with interest and put it toward another project here. But the SRF is managed by the Department of Natural Resources, and then the Environmental Energy Resources Authority Improvement, or the EIERA, they help issue our bonds. So we're a partnership as well. Next slide, please. The SRF loan terms and interest savings. This is just a really good, depiction of how substantial our savings can be. This in the next slide as well. But both SRFs are primarily loan programs. We do have some additional subsidization paired with those loans. We offer below market rates. It's an interest subsidy that's 70% of the market interest rate. So it's a 30% below the market rate. Let's see, last week it was 3.79% was that market rate. So it was at 1.14 was the SRF interest rate. So if you would close on a loan today, you would get an interest rate of 1.14%. That's anyone across the board. There's no tiers. We also have a 0.5% annual administrative fee paid annually on the outstanding principal balance of the loan that could go towards other water quality related activities. The loan terms are typically 20 years. They may vary based upon the project. We do have the ability to go up to 30, but no more than the useful life of that project. We want to make sure we're funding a project that is going to be in use. So that's why we cannot go longer than that useful life of that project. And we have a worksheet that we would do the analysis on. And we have custom amortization available to accommodate existing debt. If you're interested in what SRF can do for you, just let us know. But the trend in the market rate the last few years now, they've been slightly around that 1% mark. So it's a really good time to borrow if you need some financing for your infrastructure. Next slide, please. So I really like this slide because it's kind of a good depiction of the interest savings for SRF borrowers. If you take a $10 million market rate loan, you're going to have a principal and interest repayment of $14,525,890 over this 20 years. And then if you take that same $10 million SRF loan, you're going to have a repayment of $11,894,383. So that is the principal, the interest, and then you have $526,312 in administrative fees. So even with those admin fees, you still have a net savings of over $2.6 million that you can put toward another project. So this example is assuming a market interest rate at 3.87% interest with the subsidized SRF interest rate at 1.17%. So that's real close to where we're at right now. I think I said we were at 1.14. And it demonstrates that net savings with the SRF at 0.5% administrative fee. So next slide, please. Now, this is what everyone really probably is here to hear all about. The bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill introduction. So this is referred to as the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, and how it will impact the SRF programs. It was signed into law on November 15, 2021. It invests more than $50 billion nationally over the next, well, it's going to be 4 years in water infrastructure programs. The bill reauthorized our current base capitalization grant allotments and then expanded both SRF programs to include general supplemental funding for all SRF eligibilities for drinking water and clean water. It also added drinking water and clean water emerging contaminants funding, and then in drinking water only, the lead service line replacement funding. So basically, it also had the passage of Build America, Buy America, or what you hear, BABA. We're not going to talk about BABA today, but we are all still learning about BABA and its implications and trying to figure out ways to, help relieve some of those pain points of BABA. But we'll get through it. Next slide, please. So some of the priorities for the SRF bill implementation, they've been set by EPA, and they are shown in our intended use plans. So they were in fiscal year 23, and they'll be in the fiscal year 24 intended use plans as well. So we are combine the IUPs and project priority lists for all the funding pots. We're applying for conditional or partial grants. We're crafting single assistance agreements that contain multiple types of funding, modifying repayment terms, defining disadvantaged community criteria and our affordability criteria. And we're looking at choosing specific emerging contaminant projects. We're addressing how to increase investment in the disadvantaged communities. The bill requires 49% of the clean water SRF general supplemental and drinking water SRF general supplemental and lead must be granted to disadvantaged communities. So we are evaluating our current disadvantaged criteria, as well as looking at environmental justice and how we can better reach those people in those pockets of those communities. And then we're expanding technical assistance programs as well as part of that. We're making rapid progress on lead service line replacement. We're working closely with water communities to complete lead service line inventories so that identification and replacement can occur. We are identifying emerging contaminants like PFAS and PFOAs. We're supporting resilience and one water innovation. We're supporting American workers and renewing the water workforce, utilizing funding for resiliency and natural disasters. We are addressing domestic manufacturing with BABA expanding the existing American iron and steel requirements to include construction materials and manufactured goods. We are fully enforcing civil rights at Title VI. There's no discrimination. And finally, we are refining state SRFs to build a pipeline of projects to come to better protect the environment for future. Next slide, please. So you've probably seen this before, but this is our Clean Water SRF loan program, the eligible projects. You have your typical wastewater project examples. You're building a new treatment plant or you're doing some improvements at the existing wastewater treatment plants. We can fund acquisition of an existing wastewater treatment plant. We can fund treatment plant decommissioning or actions associated with plant replacement or regionalization projects. Combined sewer overflow and sanitary sewer overflow corrections, that's your SSOs, your I&I improvements. Projects for reusing or recycling wastewater. We're starting to see some of these come down the pipe. Sewer line extensions, construction extensions to serve other, say, get an on-site system off and connect into a centralized system. System security, efficiency, and conservation measures like your SCADA systems are also all eligible for funding. Next slide. Now, some non-point source project examples that we can also fund are measures to manage, reduce, treat, reuse, or recapture stormwater, wetland protection and restoration measures, decentralized wastewater treatment systems, and then source water protection measures, those that impact the drinking water system. So basically, the federal law requires a dedicated repayment source for SRF projects, and this can make it difficult to structure loans for non-point work. But we just wanted to make sure you all knew that non-point work, was an option, and we can fund this in addition to the traditional wastewater point system improvements. Next slide, please. So now that you know what type of projects we can fund, you need to know who are SRF eligible applicants. So municipalities, counties, public water or sewer districts, political subdivisions, instrumentalities of the state, like a school, are eligible for funding. And then privately owned and nonprofit facilities may be eligible to apply for some of those non-point source projects that we just discussed. We don't see a lot of these, but they have come up in the past, and we'll try to work with them. But again, we need to have some sort of, dedication that they're going to pay back that, or security they're going to pay back that loan. Next slide, please. And this is something we just want to make sure everyone is aware about. It's the Clean Water SRF loan, the Green Project Reserve Program. We identify the green projects in an amount equal to at least 10% of each Clean Water SRF federal capitalization grant. That's in our terms and conditions associated with the grant that we apply for each year. We have additional SRF priority points given to a project with green elements, including green infrastructure, energy efficiency, water efficiency, environmentally innovative. Now, these green project reserves, or GPRs, as we like to call them, they are not required to be considered equivalency projects. When I say equivalency, maybe that's something you all haven't heard about, but that is the amount of the capitalization grant that EPA gives to us. We have to select projects that equal the amount of the CAP grant, and we deem them as equivalent. Those projects that are selected and identified as equivalency projects will be required to comply with BABA. The other ones will not be. It's only those that are considered equivalency projects. So a fact sheet on GPR will be published soon with more information. Next slide, please. Okay, this is something we've all been waiting for. Clean Water SRF additional subsidization, aka grants, free money grants. You do not have to pay them back. You do not have to have a bonding capacity for a grant. Well, I say, let me rephrase that. You do have to have bonding capacity for the loan in conjunction with the grant, because we will purchase your bonds up until that amount of debt security. But these are the type of grants that we have available. Some are 100%, Others are in conjunction with the low interest SRF loan. So Clean Water SRF Affordability Grant, Clean Water SRF Water Quality and Incentive Grant, those are in conjunction with the loans. The Clean Water SRF Regionalization Incentive Grant, 100% grant. Clean Water SRF Emerging Contaminants Grant is also 100%. Then your clean 100% no loan, yes. And then your Clean Water SRF Engineering Report Grant. Okay, so there's a lot to cover on this slide. This is our Clean Water SRF Affordability Grant with your low interest loan. It's changed. It's changed the different criteria over the last several years since I've been in FAC. But what you need to know now is that it's going to reach any size community. And it's still for those that would have a difficulty financing projects without the grant. They need to apply by the annual Clean Water SRF application deadline, March 1st, 2 weeks away. They have to have an acceptable facility plan and a debt instrument like a general obligation or a revenue bond when they apply by March 1 if they want to be analyzed for grant. So we can now reach those disadvantaged communities. I'm going to say disadvantaged lightly because there's no really defined term for disadvantaged. EPA is leaving it up to the states to make that determination. But through our FAC map with the census tract, it's online. We can go and see those pockets of those communities, even in a large, say, metropolitan district or just a sewer district. David talked about the boundaries and everything, how they do it with districts. So we have this new tool now where we're using the 2019 American Community Survey data demographics, and we can look and see what their demographics are to see if they'd be eligible for this affordability grant. Used to be 20,000 population or less, but now we've expanded it. So you still get the population is part of the scoring criteria, but it doesn't eliminate you from this grant or excuse you from this grant. You wouldn't be disqualified if you were over 20,000 in population, if I'm making sense. So we're looking at population, looking at unemployment rate, we're looking at MHI, we're looking at, oh, who's doing that? There's check marks and scratches going on. That's odd. You see that? It's weird. Doesn't matter. It's kind of distracting. Now it's got it went away. Okay. So we're looking at population trends. What did I say? User rates. So it's all in a calculation spreadsheet. You score 195 points or more, eligible for this grant. This is done when the application comes in by March 1. So fiscal year 23, the grant was 60% of the eligible project costs, maximum of $2 million with that low interest loan. You know, we think we're going to get a number of applications this year. Last year, we had additional subsidization from back year's CAP grants we needed to fulfill and allocate. So we're looking at going back to 50% eligible project cost, maximum of $2 million. Guidance is out there. Evaluation form is out there as well. So grant funding is limited. Just know that just because you may be eligible, it doesn't mean you'll get the grant. All will be scored and evaluated, and it's very competitive. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, with our low interest loan, we have a Clean Water SRF Water Quality Incentive Grant. I think we started these grants about 3 years ago. Time flies and lose track. But this is for any size population again. They have to meet that readiness to proceed criteria, acceptable facility plan, debt instrument in place, apply by March 1, and they have to include an eligible project component. We have guidance in our intended use plan on this. So the amounts that would be allocated may change annually based on the amount of that grant that's available, similar to affordability. For example, in fiscal year 23, the grant amounts vary by eligible project component, 500,000 to $1 million to incentivize water quality improvements when combined with an SRF loan. may not exceed 60% of the project funding. This year for fiscal year 24, we're looking at going back to 50% with funding. Next slide, please. And you can get one water quality incentive grant per IUP per year if it works out and you have a qualifying component. And you could also qualify for an affordability and a water quality incentive grant, but your total project cost for that project, I believe, has to be $4 million or more. Okay, so your eligible project components, as you can see on the screen, flood mitigation infrastructure upgraded is needed to comply with new wastewater permit limits like ammonia, E. coli, phosphorus, nutrients, or to meet the assumptions of a total maximum daily load. Wastewater treatment plant improvements to provide renewable energy generation, nutrient reduction measures in drinking water supply like watersheds, measures to manage, reduce, treat, or recapture stormwater, install green infrastructure, improvements intended to reuse or recycle wastewater, collection system improvements for I&I rehab, sewer extension to serve customers within or outside of a district's or a city's service area, and then construction to connect homes with failing on-site wastewater systems to an existing treatment plant. Next slide. Okay, this is our Clean Water SRF Regionalization Incentive Grant. This is very popular as well, started a couple of years ago. Its primary purpose was to a way to reach those small, struggling private systems that are out of compliance. They're under enforcement action with the department. They have no means to afford an upgrade or even think about hiring an engineer to evaluate why they need to be, why they need to upgrade their system. So it's basically, it's for a municipality to connect another municipality or privately owned nonprofit wastewater treatment system outside of their service area. Very important. They're outside of their service area. They cannot annex them in and then apply for the grant. It's a high priority to address facilities under enforcement. It's 100% grant for all eligible costs. That's for planning, design, for the sewer extension, legal cost associated with the service agreements, land acquisition, easements, but we can't pay if it goes to condemnation. Decommissioning is eligible if the facilities to be decommissioned is owned by the publicly owned treatment work. Let's see, there's two different types of grants you could apply for. If you do not know the cost to evaluate the feasibility of connection, you could get a grant for up to $62,500 for a facility plan to evaluate that. And then if you have that facility plan, you know the cost, then you can apply for construction, design and construction costs to actually do the project. We need to know that at the time of application. Say you do the facility plan, say year one, you're applying for fiscal year 24 to evaluate connecting someone outside. This is a city applying to connect let's just say subdivision, but it could be a city applying to connect another city. You do the facility plan. If that alternative, it shows that any connection with a total estimated cost that is 110% or greater than the cost to upgrade will be ineligible. So as long as it, shows it's feasible, then we can hold those design and construction funds for the IUP like the next year or two, depending on how fast the project moves, for you actually complete the project. You do not have to reapply, is what I'm trying to say. The environmental must be complete before that grant is awarded. Let's see. I can't think of anything else, but you do need to apply by March 1. Oh, I know. You'd have to reach those construction projects. You need to reach a service agreement between the connecting entity and the one that's taking the flow. The one taking the flow has to have the capacity to accept the flow, be willing to accept the flow, and then there has to be a way to address who's going to maintain ownership of that collection system, internally, once that extension is complete. So I think once you get on the IUP, you have a year to reach an agreement before we can award the grant, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, emerging contaminants grant. This is new from the bill money. So Missouri's Clean Water SRF Emerging Contaminants Grant allocation was estimated at 26.6 million for federal fiscal years 2022 through 2026. It's 100% additional subsidization in the form of grant to eligible applicants. They have to be eligible under Section 603C of the Clean Water Act and has to address an identified emerging contaminants. Can include planning, design, or monitoring that's integral to the development of an eligible capital project. Ineligible activities are operation maintenance, water quality monitoring activities. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this slide. Basically, we will evaluate if there's an emerging contaminant at the application stage. We've added that to our newly revised Clean Water SRF and Drinking Water SRF applications, which are available online. So please use those if you are going to apply for SRF funding for this year. Let's see, we need to have a detect for an emerging contaminants in order to fund it. But we can also help with if there's a research or a reasonable potential to have emerging contaminants, like from an industry, you can't just go like sample to sample. So that's like your planning, design, and monitoring the projects. So if you've never heard of emerging contaminants, I'm going to read a little bit about it. So it's a substance or microorganism, including manufactured or naturally occurring physical, chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear material, which is known or anticipated in the environment, which may pose newly identified or re-emerging risks to human health, aquatic life, or the environment. Can include many different types of natural or manufactured chemicals and substances, such as those in some compounds, personal care products, pharmaceuticals, industrial chemicals, pesticides, and microplastics. So examples are your PFAS, antimicrobial, resistant bacteria, 6-ppd quinone, that's from tires, and microplastics. Now, contaminants with water quality criteria recommendation published by EPA under the Clean Water Act, Section 304A, except for PFAS, are not considered emerging contaminants. So that's like your nutrients, your ammonia, your nitrogen, phosphorus, certain organics, and certain metals. This is only for clean water. Drinking water has their own definition for emerging contaminants. So potential projects, you might ask: construction of publicly owned treatment works, stormwater management, non-point source pollution control, city-owned public landfills, looking at runoff from plastics and all those trash from the contaminant sites. We're still looking if they want to put the equipment at the end of the source. We're still evaluating this for eligibility. There's an emerging contaminants work group under the Water Protection Program as well. So we're all still learning as we go on this, on both clean water and drinking water. Next slide, please. Okay, that was all clean water for the most part. Now we're going to move into drinking water SRF loan program eligible applicants. So political subdivisions, including counties, incorporated cities and towns, joint municipal utility commissions, and regional water or sewer districts. Non-profit corporations providing wholesale or regional water supply, and investor-owned water utility corporations. They're eligible applicants for drinking water. Next slide, please. Does anybody want to pause for questions on clean water? Andy, I forgot to ask.
I was just going to let you know, Stacia's been sharing every link that's in every slide. So
Okay, perfect.
teamwork is awesome.
Yes, it is.
No questions.
Okay, thanks. So drinking water SRF loan programs, the projects examples, they're projects that address present or prevent future violations of health-based drinking water standards, treatment plants, transmission and distribution mains, rehabilitation of storage tanks or wells, supply sources like your wells, your interconnections and surface water intakes, storage facilities like clear wells and towers, and then water security projects are all eligible for assistance. They have to comply with Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. Next slide, please. This is new in drinking water SRF program only as of right now. It's a planning design interim loans. And I think David talked a little bit about this on his presentation, but it's a short-term planning and design loan are available to pay for design phase cost. Eligible amount, there's no maximum or minimum loan amount. The terms are 0 interest up to 36 months, and then they can roll it into a 20 or a 30-year low interest SRF loan, or a 20 to a 30-year loan. They need to apply by March 1 as a priority, but the applications are accepted year-round for this. Eligible applicants are political subdivisions of the state and non-for-profit corporations providing a wholesale or regional water supply. Eligible cost: archaeological surveys, environmental or geological studies, preparation of engineering plans, specifications, bid solicitation. So this is basically an interim loan for those planning design phases of a project. Some communities go out and get a loan from a private lender and pay for it up front. We can reimburse those as well when we close on the loan at the cost of issuance stage. But this is in the drinking water. This is just a way that we can try to help where they don't have to get an additional financing. We want to roll this out in drinking water a few years before we roll it out in clean water. So maybe next year we'll roll this out in clean water. Next slide, please. Drinking water SRF additional subsidization grants. So we have a drinking water SRF affordability grant with your loan, drinking water SRF regional connection grant, drinking water SRF lead service line replacement grant. That's its own funding pot, has its own cap grant. It's not 100% grant. That's from the bill money. And then drinking water SRF engineering report grant. Oops, let me see something. Okay, drinking water SRF affordability grant. So to compete, your project must meet the readiness to proceed criteria, apply by the annual drinking water SRF application deadline of March 1, and have difficulty financing a project without the grant. Drinking water is now using the same criteria as clean water is using. It's no longer like a disadvantage criteria. They're using the same demographics that we're using. If we change, if clean water changes theirs, drinking water is going to change. We're doing it together. It's a group effort. It's not just clean water doing this. We want to be consistent, and reaching those disadvantaged communities and those that can't afford these projects is very important to all medias. So in federal fiscal year 2022, the affordability grant was up to 50% of the eligible project costs, maximum of $2 million with the SRF loan. In federal fiscal year 23, the grant was increased to 75% of the eligible project cost, maximum of $3 million, combined with the SRF loan. Federal fiscal year 2024, the allocation is going to depend on how much grant we have. And that is yeah. Okay. There's your cost. Just going to depend on how many applications we receive, how much grant is left over from last year, how much we have to apply to this year on those projects that are really meeting that ready to proceed criteria. And next slide, please. So eligible projects include an existing water system proposes to connection to provide water to a nearby public water system, such as a political subdivision, a state, a school, a homeowner association. This is excluding for-profit business entities. They're unable to provide safe or adequate drinking water now and or in the future. Construction of an interconnection between a community water system and a regional wholesale water provider. It's necessary for the community water system to provide safe or adequate drinking water now and or in the future due to technical or cost challenges. So that's what the regional connection grant is. So if you have a project, talk to Lauren in our drinking water section about proposed drinking water connection project. Next. So this is new with the bill funding, drinking water SRF lead service line replacement. There's a lot of talk about this. So it's a grant that may not exceed 50% of the project funding request when combined with an SRF loan. Eligible projects must otherwise be drinking water SRF eligible, be a lead service line replacement project or associated activity directly connected to the identification, planning, design, and replacement of lead service lines. Any project funded under this program involving the replacement of a lead service line must replace the entire line on both the private and public portion of the line. Again, if you're having those projects, send them in by March 1. Drinking water ESSER emerging contaminants grant. It's 100% additional subsidization in the form of grant up to $5 million. Eligible projects otherwise must be drinking water SRF eligible. Primary purpose to address emerging contaminants in drinking water, focus on per and polyfluoroalkyl PFAS substances. Projects to treat any contaminant listed on any of EPA's contaminant list are eligible as long as EPA has not promulgated a national primary drinking water regulation for that contaminant. The CCL is a list of contaminants which are known or anticipated to occur in public water systems. Contaminants listed on the CCL may require future regulation under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And I'm going to pause just a second. I'm not sure oh, there they are. Okay. All right. Any questions on drinking water that I probably can't answer? Okay, so we're going to move on. How to apply for SR programs. You've heard all about who we are, what we can fund, who we can fund. So what's the next steps? Well, you guys are right time, right place. Applications are online. They are due by March 1 for our federal fiscal year 2024 clean water and drinking water intended use plans. That's 2 weeks away. Now, if you want to be considered for grant, that's the only time we're going to evaluate you for grant there. And we will accept them year round, but so paper or electronic must be complete and accurate. Please include your bond documentation if you have it. Please include the facility plan if you have it. Please include a copy of your user rate ordinance. We're going to verify user rate. Basically, the more information you provide up front, the quicker we can get through it and start working with you. And here are the links for the applications. Next slide, please.
Had a question.
Okay.
SRF lead and copper grant still available?
SRF lead and copper grant. Lead and copper grant. Is Lauren online or Stacia?
Statia's online.
Yeah, Statia's online. Lead and copper. Just in the lead service line replacement.
Stacia said she was going to ask.
Perfect. Thank you, Stacia. Teamwork.
Teamwork.
Okay, so applications, we are scoring them now as they're coming in. They're going to be competitively placed on the draft intended use plans, June or July. They'll go out on public notice. The funding allocation is not formally going to be made until the IUPs are adopted by the Clean Water Commission and then the Safe Drinking Water Commission, respectively. They must have that general obligation or revenue bond in place at the time of the application and the complete acceptable facility plan. Again, if you want to be allocated grant and put on the fundable list or analyzed for grant, we can put you on a planning list if you don't have either one of those, or if you have one but not the other, we put you on a planning list of the intended use plan, and then we can move you throughout amendments to the commission, to the IUP, through the commissions. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this is a high level view of what to expect from the state revolving fund processes. We are always working to streamline. We are always working to improve our processes. We think we got it down to pretty good, but we know we can do better because it is a lengthy process. There's a lot of stipulations. So March 1, we're doing the scoring applications. June, July, we're putting the draft IEP on public notice. You'll have a good idea of your financing. Project manager will be contacting you, spring, summer, get you through the documents, walk you through, this is what to expect. Basically, you get a lot of questions. When to start the environmental review? So from the facility plan to the point where you have selected the recommended alternative that needs to be settled. You have to have the rights to the land. So once you finalize location and the project scope, you can start your environmental review. The department's going to make an initial determination on whether it's a CADX or a FONSI. If it's a CADX, we'll consult with SHPO and the Tribal Historic Preservation. If it's deemed eligible as a historic registration from either of the above, then we'll have to do a consultation with the interested parties. It's no longer eligible for CADX. The applicants will provide us with the information. We'll work with them. We've seen an uptick in requests for cultural survey resources or cultural resource surveys, and that could slow down a project. So just keep that in mind. Both agencies have gone to electronic submittals, and SHPO went from only accepting hard copies to only accepting electronic copies. If it's a FONSI, we're going to send the full list with them for consultation. We accept other agencies' environmental reviews, such as CDBGs, or we can pay for environmental review if it's part of SRF, if the other funding agency isn't needed. And I know someone from CDBG will talk about that. I think the next presentation, they'll talk about their funding because we do pair with CDBG quite often. But don't get too far down the design path until you've received clearances from all the agencies. You'll need to hold a public meeting or a hearing for environmental impact if it's a FONSI. For clean water, at least, there's no longer a facility plan meeting. The alternative analysis is part of the environmental impact meeting. You'll need to hold a public hearing on the user rates with a public notice at least 30 days prior. That's for clean water as well. We want to look at those user rates before you have your public hearing, please, because you risk the chance of having to go back out to the folks and have another hearing if we say these rates are not going to cover the loan. So, they're just not going to be able to pay us back sufficiently. So that's why we ask that we at least preliminarily look at your rates when we're looking at your audits and your financial statements. But once we issue our CADX, which has no public notice, or our FONSI after the 30-day public notice, then the borrower can submit the plan, specifications, application for the construction permit. So that's all kind of the engineering, design. The engineers are working on that. Simultaneously, we're working on it with our project managers and our accounting staff. We're looking at your due diligence questionnaire. You need to have 3 to 5 years of preferably audited financial statements. So we have accepted financial statements that haven't been audited. We can get through it. It's just more challenging. Looking at the user rates, but we've got to make sure the system is bringing in enough revenue each year to cover all operating expenses, 100% of the debt for that year, and then an extra 10% of debt, because we're like a bank. We're lending you money. We want to get paid back. No issues. So the borrower may bid the project after that construction permit is issued and the due diligence questionnaire is approved, or at least initially approved, where we have no remaining comments on our financials analysis, show they're meeting that 110% debt service coverage. Yeah, hopefully this is about the same time. They'll go to bid for 30 days and they'll send us required documentation, the checklist. From there, we'll look at the project financing. If a grant was allocated in the IEP, we'll split that out. We'll send the information to our bond counsel. We'll prepare a financial information assistance agreement after we concur with the bids. If CDBG is involved, we're going to notify them every step of the way so they can be ready on their end to provide that financing gap. And then, like to say, from about 60 days after we concur with the bids, we close on the loan. And from there, pre-construction conference is established. Usually the engineers schedule that, and we talk about the next steps, the actual construction project and inspections and Davis Bacon and American Iron Steel and whatnot. So a typical process is 18 to 24 months. Depends on how motivated the community is and how responsive they are. We're always working on ways to streamline, and we're here to help you. I can't stress that enough. That is why we are here, to help the communities. Any questions? We've got a few more slides. Sorry, this is really long.
Clarification, this is Liz. The question about lead service line inventory or money for the lead and copper lead and copper question. We weren't real clear on what they were asking.
Okay.
And Andy, that must have gone directly to you because I didn't see that question.
Yes,
Can
he
you
was
read
asking-
that question?
he was asking about the state revolving fund lead and copper grant still available for the lead service line inventories. I think that's the question is there money available for doing lead service line inventories?
Okay.
That answers yes.
And the answer is yes, but through the SRF bill program, it's not 100% grant. It's the most you can get is 50% grant, correct? For that work.
That's what I said.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if now
Yes,
the
50%.
ARPA, yeah, 50% grant. The ARPA funds that were awarded last July, or I'm sorry, in November for lead service line inventory only was 100% grant, but that money is all gone. There's no more ARPA funds for that. So,
That's been allocated to the communities.
right. So, and there's no more applications for that. So you can't even apply for that anymore.
Yeah.
But the SRF bill money is available, but it's only 50% grant.
Correct.
Okay. So let me ask a question on this, Joan, or Stacia too, whoever. Let's say somebody wants some money to do lead service line inventory, and they apply and they don't want to take a loan out for the 50%, but they have money that they can match it. Can they do that, or do they have to take out the loan in order to get the grant money?
It's got to be combined with an SRF loan, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I would think it would. So, okay.
That's
All
what I
right.
have in notes. We can definitely clarify with drinking water folks, so Liz.
Okay. I can see that question coming up and as we get down the road.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay.
Okay. So we talked a lot about our programs. Sorry for overwhelming everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about, real life situation success. So this is the City of Carrollton drinking water SRF program and how SRF funding saved them, money. So the City of Carrollton's water system, a little bit about the town, 3,600 population, county in Carroll County, Missouri, had over 34 miles of water mains, many undersized and dead-end lines. The majority of the mains were cast iron and ductile iron, many over 80 years old. One cast iron main was stamped 1884.
Wow.
And the water loss in the previous years was 30% to 48%, so darn near 50%. They didn't have much control over their system, and they were showing that water loss. There's a lot of water and chemicals that were lost, costing them money. So they came to SRF, and this is what they did. Next slide, please. They installed over 22,000 linear feet of new and replacement lines and 200 valves. They replaced the mains in the worst condition. They provided system looping and reduced the need for flushing. They reduced the water loss and line breaks, and then they added valves for the maintenance flexibility. So that was basically, they would not have to shut down a large portion of their system. They do traditional maintenance. They could just isolate a small area and then not interrupt service. So that was very important. Distribution. Next slide, please. They did this loan only. There was no grant component. So the loan closed in November of 2020. The SRF interest rate was 0.78%. It was a $4,181,000 SRF loan. They had that 0.5% administrative fee, and it was a 20-year term. They did include the SRF refinancing or private short-term bond for engineering design. So it was a $900,000 interest savings compared to private financing. So, 0.78, now it was like 1.17, I believe I said earlier. That's still pretty good. The town was very, very pleased with the project. Next slide. Okay. back on track. We're almost done, I promise. But this is really important because we've seen a lot of these. So it's our SRF engineering report grants for both clean water and drinking water. So clean water is now the Clean Water Engineering Report Grants, formerly the Small Community Engineering Assistance Program Grant, aka SCEAPS. It's not SCEAPS. Drinking water was the phase 1 public drinking water branch grants. I'll probably mutilate that, but it's now the Drinking Water Engineering Report Grants. It is to help you get an engineer procured, develop an engineering report, and look at some necessary improvements, identifies the needed work, and it gives a cost estimates for the work. We'll walk you through the process. So 2.8 million in federal fiscal year 2023 IUP is available, and then we have 400,000 available in federal fiscal year 2023 as well. Drinking water. Next slide, please. So if you don't already have an engineering report developed, you can submit an application, have no outstanding fees to the department, do not have this already developed for the same issues, and then agree to make a good faith effort to pursue the recommendations contained in the approved engineering report. And if you meet some of these criteria. Next slide, please. Well, I get this mixed up. So I'm going to talk about the amounts and then the criteria. So it's 80% of the cost for most communities, maximum amount of 50,000. And then they would pay that 20% match. Say a contract is $62,500. They apply for a $50,000 engineering report grant. They're paying $12,500 themselves as their match. It's a reimbursement program. You don't get a whole check for $50,000 up front. No, you after the grant's awarded, then you submit pay requests. They pay their engineer. They submit those invoices to us. We reimburse up to 80%, meaning the city is left with that 20% with each cost. That's how it works. If they're deemed disadvantaged, and when I say disadvantaged, we're using decennial census information right now. Population 3,300 or less. User rates 2% or more their MHI. And MHI 75% or less in the state MHI. Using 2010 decennial census information as of right now. But they could receive a grant of $62,500, 100% grant for a facility plan. We accept applications year round. Now it's for small communities. So populations 10,000 or less, which is what, 96% of Missouri is 10,000 or less. I'm not sure, but there's a large number of small communities in Missouri. Next slide, please. So if you're 10,000 in population or less, you really need a facility plan developed for, you go out there, regional office conducts an inspection, you need to upgrade your facility, meet ammonia. Okay, meeting new permit requirements, inflow and infiltration work with the collection system, improvements to eliminate wet weather discharges from a peak flow clarifier in or basins, capacity and hydraulic improvements at the wastewater treatment plant to address a reasonably anticipated increase in users or connection, or your treatment plant, it simply has outlived its useful life expectancy. We can fund a facility plan to evaluate any of those criteria. We will not pay for work previously done prior to the grant award. And you have 18 months from the grant award to prepare the facility plan. We'll hold that 10% retainage until after we accept the facility plan. When we review it and provide comments and say you turn in the final facility plan, 90 days ahead of the budget period, mind you, because we need to have time to look at the comments, we'll prepare a cost estimate. We'll analyze you for grants, even if you don't have bonds. Just say, hey, if you did have bonds, you would potentially qualify for affordability grant or a water quality incentive grant based upon the project scope, your user rate, the number of connections. So we do that all for you at the time we accept your facility plan. We're seeing a lot of folks come back into us for SRF to actually finance the construction project that we paid for this facility plan for. So that's good. We don't want it to sit on a shelf somewhere. But definitely very popular. We'll walk you through it. 4 to 6 months easily can get a grant awarded after we receive an application. Next slide, please. Drinking water, injury report grants, very similar. We'll pay for 80% of the cost, maximum order of 30,000 for most communities, or 100,000 of the cost, 100% of the cost for disadvantaged communities with a maximum order of 37,500. Applications are accepted year round. I think they used to do it one time, but they've changed that as well. Your eligible applicants are municipalities, your counties, your public sewer districts, public water districts, population fewer than 3,300. Larger systems developing a plan to serve a system with a population under 3,300 or a group of households with a well with unsafe water exceeding the MCO. Next slide, please. Eligible cost. Injury costs for development, engineering report, facility plan for a drinking water project to address system improvements related to compliance and ability to provide safe drinking water. Next slide. So the other grant we have is a Clean Water SRF Integrated Management Plan grant. We have not received applications for this. It's been available for probably 2 years. But an eligible amount is 50% of the cost for eligible entity, maximum award of 50,000. We would accept applications year round. It's for communities less than 20,000 in population that own or operate a permanent municipal separate storm sewer system, MS4, or have significant stormwater challenges unrelated to inflow and infiltration that require capital planning. Your eligible costs are your planning and engineering costs to develop the integrated management plans for municipal wastewater and stormwater management. May also include drinking water management. Next slide. Am I good? Okay. How do they work? Submit an application, have no outstanding fees to the department, do not already have an integrated management plan for the same issue, and agree to make a good faith effort to pursue the recommendations contained in the approved integrated management plan. They must follow U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Integrated Municipal Stormwater and Wastewater Planning Approach Framework in Missouri's Integrated Planning Framework. Okay, so talked about all that. You thought that was already new. There's more. Next slide. So, what are you seeing in the fiscal year 2023 and 2024 intended use plans? Expanded the affordability criteria to reach underserved pockets of larger communities. We're expanding the technical assistance grant opportunities. We're doing a new grant offering to nonprofits for the repair and or replacement of failing or poorly functioning on-site wastewater systems. We've had a couple stakeholder meetings and we're getting everything ready. We've had some really valuable feedback from our stakeholders. So look for that to roll out, this summer. We are reducing the financing costs for equivalency projects as well. They've got to comply with BABA. Next slide. We're here to help. So if you have any questions at any time, our main email is here, our main phone number. You can visit us on the web. You can get mine or Stacia or Joe's or Lauren's number at any time. It's challenging. There are a lot of steps to the process, but we've got a great team of project managers, engineers, accountants, planners, and clerical staff, and we won't let you down. We will help you over the finish line with a successful project. And thank you for your time. Get your applications in by March 1.
Okay. Wow, that was a lot of information. But it was good information. So we will open it up in the chat or verbally if you want to ask a question. Again, Stacia, I think, is going to participate online on our roundtable at the end of the presentation. So if you can't think of anything right now, be sure and write your questions down and we'll get them in the roundtable. But Joan, while we're waiting, a couple of questions. Just to clarify, you said to qualify for grants both on the water and the wastewater side, clean water side and drinking water side, March 1st application deadline, which is a couple of weeks away, but readiness to proceed. Can you again explain what is readiness to proceed? What do you have to have in place to be considered ready to proceed?
Sure, Liz, and I'm glad you brought that up because I did forget to mention one thing. on that. So we'll take a moment to go back through that process. So yes, we are accepting applications for competitive placement on the clean water and drinking water SRF intended use plans for federal fiscal year 2024. They are due March 1. Those that come in by March 1 with the acceptable complete facility plan, they don't have to go through the environmental process, but say they apply for an engineering report grant and we've accepted that, that's good enough for us. If they're doing a new or expanded discharge or they're relocating their outfall, they'll have to do an anti-degradation review. Now that would be part of a facility plan that needs to be completed by March 1 in order to meet that first readiness proceed criteria. The second part is they have to have the voted authorization secured, those bonds secured for the amount of the anticipated loan. If they're looking at a grant potentially, we can still put them on the IUP fundable list. We have to be very careful about that because we can only loan up to the amount of bonded capacity that they have voted. It's risky. They may have to go back out for more bonds, right? Because of the prices and everything have increased. And we tell them that, but it's their choice. So once we go through those projects, allocate grant money, if they either for affordability or water quality incentive or potentially both. If there's money left over, additional subsidization grants, if there's someone that came in by March 1, they did not have bonds passed, but they have everything ready and it's going to be put on the April ballot. I think January 28th, someone told me that stuff had to be submitted. They had a bond for April and it passed and they had the acceptable complete facility plan already. We could potentially allocate grant to them at that point, as long as there's money left over from those that truly met readiness proceed criteria. We actually allowed that flexibility in the IUP last year, and then it carries on to this year. So people probably don't know about it that much, but we want to be able to help them because we only allocate grant to one time a year. And there's a little bit of time between the draft IUP and getting on public notice that if bonds do pass in April, we can make some adjustments before that final IUP is approved in October or November. Does that answer your question?
It does. So just to clarify, if a system does not have any voted capacity, does not have anything on the April ballot, which you said, I think it's too late to get anything on the April ballot at this point, then they can't meet that readiness to proceed for this funding cycle.
Correct.
Okay.
They say they pass bonds in August or even November. Their next bet, if they want to look at grants and they have the accepted facility plan, is apply next March when they truly meet readiness to proceed criteria. And you can be on the IUP for 2 years without having to reapply. And I forgot to say this, but we're finding that if something happens and they do meet readiness to proceed criteria, rather than waiting that 2 years, they're applying on that the second year so they can be analyzed for grant.
Okay, so that was my next question. I knew you could be on the IUP for 2 years. So if I apply late, or I apply by March 1st, but I don't have my bonds, I'm on the IUP for 2 years, but I could have it by next year. Do I have to reapply to be eligible for grant?
Yes.
Or can I carry over? No. Okay. So I can't carry over to be eligible next time. I've got to reapply.
Correct.
Okay.
And we have directed folks to do that. Even though it's more work on us, that's the only way they could potentially be analyzed for grant is by March 1 when they reapply.
Okay. Okay. Next question. As far as going for a bond issue, and we kind of talked about this the last session we had on this back in January. So the recommendation was to ask voted authority for the entire cost of the project. And then if you get grant, you just don't issue all of your bonding authority. But that way, if something happens, you still got you can still proceed with your project. Like you said, it's kind of risky to try to guess how much grant money you're going to get versus loan. Is that still the recommendation, is put the entire amount on the project on your ballot?
Yes, absolutely is a recommendation. But again, if they only put half of it on the ballot and they qualify for a grant and they have enough loan when at times, if bids come back sufficient and the funding package is adequate and we're properly sizing that loan and there is ample bonding capacity when we enter into that purchase agreement, you know, considering the grant amount, then that's what we need is the amount of the loan, the amount of that authority.
Right. So they just don't issue all of it. So they've got some outstanding bonding authority for something in the future then. Right. So, okay. So I had a question sent about the loan process, and interest accruing. And basically, if you're awarded a loan, how does that money come down? Do you get it all sent to you at one time and then you spend it, or is it as the project progresses, you pull down from the state, you know, you send out payments? And is interest accruing on that the whole time that you're in construction so that you owe an interest payment?
Okay,
Do
great
you understand the
question.
question?
Yeah, I think I got it all. I kind of jotted the notes. So good question. You only pay interest during the first, the year when you're under construction. What's really important is initiation of operations. And that's the date when the first working component is online and capable of being used for its intended purpose. And I'm pretty sure that's for drinking water or very similar, but I know that's what it is for clean water. That's when the principal on your loan, on your amortization schedule, is paired with your interest. So you do not get a loan all at once. I mean, it's a reimbursement program as well.
Okay.
So
is interest accrued? So is interest accrued as you pull the principal down, as you pull the money down, or are you accruing interest on the entire loan amount during the construction? I think is the question.
I don't have an accounting online, but I'm pretty sure interest is accrued on the amount you're pulling down, because as it's when the project is done, you submit a completion of funding certificate and you tell us you're no longer going to request any more funds to pay your engineer or your contractor on the project. And then we re-amortize it for what your loan repayments would be.
Okay.
Rest of the year.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions before I ask another one? I don't want to cut anybody out. Okay, so my next question, Joan, there's a lot of different programs within the Clean Water SRF and the Drinking Water SRF. Can you get more than one? Can you get a project funded with more than one grant? I'm probably not saying that. So like on the wastewater side, can I get an SRF loan and grant with a water quality incentive grant or a emerging contaminants grant? Can I dip into more than one pot for a project?
Yes, we have one on the IUP right now that is I think it's affordability grant, emerging contaminants grant, might have a water quality incentive grant component. So you can, I think I said earlier, the magic number, if you qualify for affordability grant and a water quality incentive grant, I think the total project cost has to be 4 million. I'm looking at for fiscal year 24 IUP, because that magical percentage is 50%. The grant can't exceed 50% of the total project cost. So that could be more than one grant. The other thing, you can apply for more than one clean water engineering report grant. Say you do one for a wastewater treatment facility improvements to look at upgrade and meet new permit requirements. You can turn around, as long as you're making good faith effort on that first project, you could turn around and apply for another engineering report grant say maybe in another 6 months or a year to do one for wastewater treatment system improvements. So you can do that. But
Okay,
yeah, and we can do a drinking water and a clean water SRF project together. Just generally speaking, one is going to move faster than the other, but we could have two drinking water or a drinking water and a SRF project on the IUP for the same community. So we're working with them simultaneously, but one's generally going to be awarded quicker. Does that make sense?
okay. Yes, yes, okay. So we have a couple questions here. Does the lead and copper loan grant cover a capital purchase of equipment to conduct the inventory, such as a vac track?
Stacia or Lauren? I cannot answer that.
Okay. We may save that one for the roundtable and give them time to
Yeah.
look at that. So, okay, so that's
Does it
Cindy.
cover-
I know, Cindy, if we don't come back to that at the roundtable, bump us again in the chat, okay? And we'll get to, that would be the drinking water side. And we'll get to Lauren and get an answer for that, okay? So Stacia clarified on the loan payments. According to accounting unit, folks would only pay interest during construction on the amount drawn down, not the full loan amount, minus any loan principal repayments that happen to be paid as well. So that, yeah, that clarifies what you said. So that would be, that's good. That answers the question. So, okay. All right. Again, we're open for questions in the chat if you want to put anything in. They have a lot of funds available in the SRF program. And, you know, now's your chance to go and at a real good interest rate to get that done. Question that came up last time I want to repeat is on the lead and service line inventory bill money, and this may be a question for Lauren. Do you have to have your lead service line inventory and plan in place to get those funds to do replacement work?
Let me find my notes. I'm pretty sure we have. No, can get a loan and a grant for SRF for inventory.
Okay, so you can use that money. It's just 50% grant though, and
Right.
and the loan. And then the other thing that I get questioned about is the regular SRF cap grant, capitalization grant versus the bill money. Is there a different application for the different types of funds, or is it still just the regular SRF application form and it's all kind of put in together and awarded out of the same pot of money then?
Yeah, it's still the regular SRF application form. We've incorporated emerging contaminants on that form. Drinking water, I'm sure, has put lead service line on their form as well. It's separate cap grants from EPA, but it's all same type of money, and then you apply for SRF on the one application.
Yeah. So the applicant doesn't really see the difference there as far as the process, the application process.
We're going to do all the analyses and looking at the project when it comes in. So we'll look at the grant components, EC components, water quality incentive grant, affordability grant. Yeah, we'll look at all that. They don't have to specifically designate, but like I said, EC is on there now for sure. So that would help us out. Say, by the way, this project is EC. Great.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions at this point. Again, Cindy, we'll get back to your question in the roundtable and hopefully have an answer for you on the lead copper loan and grant. And thank you, Joan. That was a lot of information. It was good information. And we are going to take a 10-minute break before our next presenter. So,
You all.
So we will see you shortly. Andy, did you have any last minute instructions for anybody?
Yes, I did. In the chat box, I went ahead and sent it to everyone. If you could please input your system name and your water system ID number. If you do not know your water system ID number, I have included a link in the chat box. Once you click on that link, it should take you to the Drinking Water Watch webpage. If you go over to County Map Search on the right of the menu, click on County Map Search, a Missouri map comes out with all the counties. Click on your county, a listing of all the systems in that county come up on the screen, and you should be able to find yours right there with your system ID number. That is a request from Jim Patton, who is now our EPA technical assistance and training person at MRWA. Jim, if you'd like to jump on and add any further instructions with that, please do so. And if not, we will be going to break. Okay, we're going to get started once again. Our next session for today will be CDBG funding for water and wastewater projects with Debbie Feedback. And here is Debbie.
Hello, welcome. I'm here today to talk to you about the CDBG Water and Wastewater Program. My name's Debbie Feedback, and I'm the Chief Development Officer for the CDBG program. So I am over the project development and environmental review. Next slide. And you can go to the next slide. So what is CDBG? The Community Development Block Grant was established by the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. Originally, it was 8 categorical grants. The funds originate the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then they are administered by the Missouri Department of Economic Development. They're allocated according to a formula basis, and this is based on entitlement versus non-entitlement allocations. Your entitlement communities and cities and counties receive the funds directly. The non-entitlement funds are then distributed out through the state of Missouri. Entitlement would be communities and counties. The communities are 50,000 and over, and counties are 200,000 and over. Next slide. So who can apply? Only the non-entitlement units of general local government can be a lead applicant on the CDBG application process. Again, these are cities less than 50,000 and counties less than 200,000. CDBG cannot be awarded directly to individuals or businesses. There are some cases where nonprofits, special districts may be included as sub-applicants, but it must be a city or a county who makes the application. Next slide. So the water wastewater program is developed to help communities establish or approve local water or sewer systems. The grants may be used for construction that is related to water treatment and distribution and sewer treatment and collection for publicly owned systems. So CDBG funds are gap financing. And with the water and wastewater program, this is in partnership with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources and USDA Rural Development. CDBG cannot accept contingent funding. There are some limited exceptions for some bond measures, but this is rare. Our applications are open cycle, which means year-round, but it does require an invitation after completing the Missouri Water Wastewater Review Committee process. So projects are evaluated through the Missouri Water and Wastewater Review Committee. And the reason this committee has been formed is kind of to help increase communication, reduce the administrative burdens. It helps improve the coordination of all the funding, and it maximizes the long-term benefits to communities. So what are the project requirements for CDBG? Next slide.
Sorry.
So in CDBG, you have to meet a national objective. On the water and wastewater projects, you must determine prior to application and have it demonstrated by census data or survey that at least 51% of the beneficiaries meet the low to moderate income. HUD determines the LMI to be persons and families with incomes at or below 80% of county median household income. And so to even be considered, you have to make sure that the community is LMI. Next slide. So income surveys are valid for 4 years from the date of completion. You can do this by telephone, mail, or in-person data collection. Recent guidance from HUD has relaxed the number of responses that are required. You can work with CDBG staff to ensure the process is adequate and that it helps minimize the administrative burden. So also required is an environmental review. It requires a NEPA compliant environmental review that is prepared to HUD standards. These costs can be reimbursed. They cannot include work within the floodway. And this does not include construction acquisition activities that have been started after or prior to the environmental review approval. So you have to wait to do any of the activity until after CDBG has approved your environmental review. So the process with the Missouri Water Wastewater Review Committee, which consists again of Department of Natural Resources and USDA Rural Development and CDBG. You must complete a 2-page project proposal with your PER and submit it to the review committee for review. So the project gets reviewed, and within 30 to 45 days of submitting the proposal, you should then hear back from the representative. So following that review, you're either going to get written correspondence, which typically is in a letter but sent to you by email, with the summary of comments and or an invitation to apply. So your comments might include some next steps to take before you can receive that invitation to apply. And when applying, keep in mind each agency will follow its own full application process. And your full application must be submitted individually to each agency. Right here is an example of the 2-page project proposal. And all of this can be found on our website. If you go to ded.mo.gov/CDBG, at the very bottom, if you scroll down, you will see an option for water wastewater, and then that will take you to the site that will provide you information, guidelines on the application process, but also a link to the proposal. Next slide. Okay, and that does complete the information, and I believe that we're holding questions this time until the end of all of the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Yeah, we'll hold all the questions till the roundtable. And Debbie will be participating with that. So if you have questions on block grant, be sure and write them down, and we'll get to them in the roundtable. So
okay, just a matter of introduction. I'm John Benson with DA Davidson.
I'm Brock Gill with DA-Davidson.
And so just up to this point, it sounds like you guys have heard from CDBG, USDA, and DNR on the SRF program. These are grant and subsidized loan programs operated by state and federal governments. But now we're set to talk about the commercial debt market and that side of things. And we have a few tools that we can use to help provide financing for your projects. So with that. So as a generalization, these tools are quicker and easy financing solutions, but they come with additional costs. So with that, as you can see, we kind of have two main pathways, bonds, which everyone is kind of familiar with that term, and then leases, which in this case, we're actually going to kind of group certificates of participation, which are a form of lease, in with the bonds and that process. But there are the two overarching pathways, which are bonds and leases. And so bonds is a generic term that covers a few different types of financing alternatives. One key point I'd like to make here, we're going to cover that process and benefits of those different financing tools, but we will not be going over the actual election process for bonds. But that is something that we certainly can help out with, whether that's on the public education front of things or putting together brochures just to help out pass your election. So, all right, so we'll start with just the overarching municipal bonds. This is what you all usually think about when it comes to the bond election. However, as we'll see, an election isn't always necessary in the case of the COPs, certificates of participation. This is a type of borrowing that can be distributed out to multiple investors, i.e. an individual buys a small portion of the entire financing, and bonds can be used on virtually any project, and they have a lot of flexibility in structuring terms. Whereas USDA and SRF, you tend to be a little more restricted to a mortgage style payment structure. This just means we can create a payment structure that increases over time or decreases over time. Or if you have existing debt outstanding, we can actually wrap is our term for it. We can wrap the existing around the existing debt. So then on the right-hand side here, this is actually a little snippet of an official statement. This is the main document that we use when moving forward with the marketing of these bonds to individual investors. And we work very closely with bond counsel, the attorneys and lawyers on the deal or on the transaction to make sure that this document has all of the pertinent information necessary to develop investor interest and make sure you all get a good price in the form of an interest rate. And so with that, I'll kind of look through here. I think I've kind of covered everything. And yeah, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is going to be just a really, really simple view of how a municipal bond is structured. So it's really no different than any other borrowing or financing in that money is lent out by multiple investors to you all as issuers of the debt, and then it's slowly paid back in the form of interest and principal. And the interest on these deals we actually call coupons. And this is an old term, but it's related to the physical nature of what bonds used to be. The investor actually used to get a piece of paper, a certificate, and actually I think we have on the next slide, we'll get to it, but there was a certificate that you would actually clip off coupons, not dissimilar to what you would take to the grocery store, but you would clip off coupons from the actual bond certificate, and you take those to the bank to get paid your interest back. And obviously nowadays, this is all automated, direct deposit straight to an investor's account. And to make your all's as issuers lives simpler, there's usually a paying agent or a trustee that you make your one payment to, and then they divvy that up amongst all of the individual investors and pay those out through direct deposit and a simple process like that. And I actually think on the next slide we have a little picture of that. You want to go to the next slide? Oh, yep. So this is what an old bond used to look like. I just kind of wanted to include this in here just to show you all. This is the way things used to be done back in the day. Nowadays we don't see this anymore. So we'll move on to the next slide. All right. So municipal bonds, how do we get it? The process looks similar to this. This is obviously very simplified. This is how we try to make issuers feel. We don't want to get down, too deep into the nitty gritty here or doing the process. But when you start a project, usually you're some way down the line, maybe close to construction bids. And so you want to go forward and develop a financing team. We would obviously ask that you call us. But this is a step where you can include your underwriters, financial advisors, local attorneys, and bond counsel. And in this situation, we can operate either as a financial advisor or an underwriter. I guess more specifically, when we're talking about the actual state revolving fund, DNR, SRF loans and grant process, we quite frequently operate as financial advisors on those bond issues. But back to the commercial debt side of things, we've been underwriting deals with MRWA and Missouri Rural Water for 30 years through Charlie and Steve as well, our colleagues in this. So then we move on to documentation. And this is referring back to official statements and all the other legal documents for the transaction. If it's necessary, once we get a rough draft of documents and the transaction, we will actually go out for a rating to ratings agencies, which are essentially a third party commenting on the fiscal responsibility and financial position of a district or a city. And this is similar to a credit score that you get when going out for a mortgage. It's really just on steroids. There's a lot that goes into that process. So throughout that whole process, we'll be working with the engineers, attorneys, and you all to develop the structure of the issue, whether that's payment dates, the actual payment structure, whether that's increasing, decreasing, or wrapped around other debt. And then once we kind of get that honed in on, we'll actually move forward to the marketing of the bonds. And this is where we actually finalize transaction terms. We'll work with investors to get the exact rates, early payoff dates, and among other terms that will end up going into the final documents. Kind of moving on, once we have all the investors on board, we'll finalize the financing package and we'll go forward to approval from the governing body, whether that's the district board or the city council. And I guess the last few points here: execute finalized documents and closing. These are relatively self-explanatory. Closing results in the funding of the project, and we move forward with construction. So I think we're good to go to the next slide. Okay, so now we have a rough idea of the process of just how bonds and security are issued. So let's talk a little bit about general obligation bonds. And this is what most people think of when they hear the term bond. Supermajority approval in a bond election. It's paid from property taxes and can be used on virtually any project. Considering this is MRWA, and most of you all are probably concerned with utility type projects, We won't spend too much time with general obligation bonds today, but just a note, they're generally used for streets and stormwater, among really just less revenue generating projects. So kind of the pros and cons of general obligation bonds. It's the lowest rate possible in the commercial market due to security benefits and lower risk on the investor standpoint. It's the least complex structure. The disadvantages are what you'd expect. 20-year term limit just means you can't lower debt service by extending the term. For example, a 15-year mortgage, the payment is going to be much higher than if you go out on your house and get a 30-year mortgage, given the same rate. So being limited to 20 years by the Constitution is quite restrictive. The last note here is just regarding the Constitution's restriction on debt capacity as far as general obligation bonds are concerned. And really, just to boil it down, it's somewhere between 10 and 20% of assessed value. So if you have a $10 million assessed value for your city, conceivably you could have $1 to $2 million in general obligation debt. And so then moving on to revenue bonds. So this topic is a little more pertinent to utility providers. Generally, revenue bonds are used for water and sewer and other revenue generating projects, hence the name. The process of issuing revenue bonds is really very similar to general obligation bonds. The key here is that rather than being restricted by the state constitution, revenue bonds are really just restricted by revenues. Debt service coverage, which is down at the bottom, and a little formula there, revenues over the actual payments on the debt. That is the key topic and the high priority here when looking at issuing revenue bonds. This is just a statistic describing what revenues the investors can deem available to actually be paid back on their bond investment. So whereas the USDA has a 1.1 times coverage requirement, we certainly have completed deals with 1.1, 1.2 times coverage, but you tend to see better rates when you get into higher coverage levels, i.e. the district or the city has more available water and sewer revenues than debt service. And so moving on to pros and cons. There we go. So I guess the main point here, you only required by simple majority approval in the election. There aren't really any disadvantages here that revenues, it's really that revenues are dictating everything. So this is why we'd argue to make sure you stay on top of your rates. We always want to make sure that systems are able to cover general maintenance for their systems on a yearly basis, as well as allowing themselves the flexibility to obtain financing for future projects. And I guess everything else kind of here is self-explanatory. So with that, I think I'm passing it off to Brock for certificates of participation.
All right. Thank you. Certificates of participation, also known as COPs. Certificates can be used for a wide variety of projects, including but not limited to water, sewer, gas, and the list keeps going on. You can use a portion, sorry, let me back up. This is payable by all legally available funds. So if the city is going to be doing a city hall renovation, you can use a portion of your enterprise funds or a percentage to help pay off the debt. On a yearly basis, the board will have to appropriate the funds or non-appropriate funds. So this is a choice every year that the council will have to choose. It's a pretty quick turnaround, roughly takes 45 days to close. And with that, anything
Next slide.
Thank you. One major advantage of certificates, no voter approval is needed. So no one going out to an election like a bond. One disadvantage is that it offers a slightly more complex structuring, so interest rates will be slightly higher compared to bonds. Okay, moving on. Lease purchase agreement, or simply known as a lease. This is going to be similar to a certificates, but it's only going to be placed with one investor compared to certificates where there are going to be multiple. This offers a simple and quicker turnaround compared to bonds. It usually only takes around 30 to 45 days to close. Interest rates are going to be fixed for the life of the issue. An example with a lease, if you're going to be doing a street project, you can use the concrete as a collateral instead of the real estate. Let's see, did I forget anything on the lease?
Yeah, I think maybe just the collateral being the finance property is subject to forfeiture in the event of a non-appropriation. And that goes for, backing up a little bit, that goes for cops as well. But other than that, I think, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So this is going to be the process for a lease. You can think of it like you're buying a house. The investor lends you the money. You make principal and interest payments back to the investor in the form of a lease payment. And then at the end of the term, you, the issuer, owns the property free and clear. This is a project finance process. It's going to be similar to bonds. The only difference really is going to be, we're going to be putting together a term sheet instead of an official statement, which was explained earlier with John.
Documents are a lot less, they're a lot shorter and a little more to the point.
Right. Once we finish the term sheet, we're going to send this out to bid where it's multiple investors, compiling the documents, and then presenting it to you for approval. Once we get approval, we're going to go to finalize documents and then closing, and this takes roughly 45 days. We've done it in 3 weeks. So relatively a little bit quicker than bonds.
I guess I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that Charlie and Steve would say we can get this done in 3 weeks. It is, you know, under extreme circumstances, we can move very fast on these lease purchase agreements for sure.
Okay. So it's a lease purchase. We like to think this is a great tool for issuers because it takes away, takes away interest rates risk and construction risk, because you know what the cost is of your project and the interest rates today. You don't know the interest rates in 2 years.
Yeah.
So this offers a very quick turnaround, very simple, very.
Yeah, and I think the only thing it's kind of adding on your point would be, or I guess it's not adding on the point, but for example, if you're moving forward with a project and your financing timeline is 2 years from now, you don't know what construction costs are going to do in that time. You certainly don't know. No one knows what interest rates are going to do in that amount of time. So when you can kind of get to the point quickly and get that interest rate locked in and start construction, it's at least a great tool as far as uncertainty goes.
Right. Takes away the headache. Right. And with this, I'll pass it back to John.
Oh, well, I might as well just keep talking. So we're just providing a little bit of a case study here. So as to not name names, we're just going to call this the city of euphoria and the state of anxiety. So we were approached when a discharge permit came up for renewal, and the city received guidance from the Department of Natural Resources to correct discharge treatment violations. The city contacted their go-to engineer of record to establish an estimate of probable cost. Concurrently, the city was working through the USDA Rural Development to obtain grant and loan funding. As required, USDA, the city had bond counsel and their local counsel prepare bond election proceedings. And in order to be conservative, they actually elected or went out for election for 50% more than the estimate of probable cost. So this, as an example, we'll say it was $2 million was a probable cost, and they actually went out for $3 million to the voters. So then the vote for the sewage system went forward, and it passed overwhelmingly. So final design came in and was completed, and projects went out for bid. But contractors' bids were way in excess of what was elected and the engineer's probable cost. So all the bids were rejected, and the city was back to square one. So they went and placed another bond on the ballot. Lo and behold, bond passed overwhelmingly. Bids came in again, over budget again, double whoops. It's deja vu, really. So contractors' bids were way over, so they actually had to go all the way back. So long story short here, this was an urgent deal. They gave us a call, and they were short about $400,000 when it came up to us. So the only real answer here to get things done quickly was the lease purchase financing, which Brock was just talking about a second ago. It doesn't require a public vote, and the city could approve it in 2 readings. And so I think we got it done very quickly, 3 or 4 weeks. So the end result of the financing stack was voted bonds by the USDA, grant funding from the USDA, Rural Development, and CDBG, everyone you've heard from today. A small borrower loan was actually there as well through DNR and the Development Finance Board. And then finally, we came through with a commercial lease financing through a regional bank. So the contractor was selected, project construction proceeded, and change orders were minimal, and the project came through on time and on budget after the second time around. So I guess this is really just to say, I think it's a good idea to call us early, get us involved, and allow us to make sure everything's kind of moving forward as it should be, and we don't get into this situation. That said, we'll certainly play knights in shining white armor or in shining armor, and come in and help fund any gaps in financing. So I think other than that, we're done, unless Brock has anything to add.
I don't have anything to add. I think it was great.
I think we can open it up to questions.
Okay, it's open for questions. Any questions?
Okay. Let's see. We have a question. Yes, hang on a second. Can you confirm that federal government's entities cannot apply for state funding or grant for lead copper rule? So can a state entity, or I'm sorry, a federal entity, is a federal entity eligible for DNR funding or CDBG funding?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to answer this incorrectly, so I'm going to say pass on this one. I think this is something that we should ask some of the other folks that have been involved today.
Okay, we might when we get the other agencies in front in the roundtable. So that's Keith. We will put this in our roundtable questions, okay? Because we'll have block grant and DNR and USDA there. And we can
Okay.
confirm that or get that answer for you. Okay. All right. That's a good question. Anybody else have a question for John or Brock?
And you can feel free to call us anytime with questions as well.
So question, you guys, if I'm a city and I'm looking at a project, but I'm looking at, DNR, USDA funding, do I need to still call you and bring you in? At what point would you want to be involved in a project? At the very beginning? I'm sure you don't want to be like the state of euphoria where you get called in at the last minute to.
We would rather have this not be the situation. But that said, I think just as early as you can, just when the project's being discussed, I think we'd like to just have the information. In the case of USDA financing, we're really not going to do much there, and we'll take a back seat to them for sure. In the case of state revolving fund and DNR, we usually work as a financial advisor, helping out the DDQ and the election process certainly as well. I guess.
We also help run numbers for cities or districts when going through the SRF or issuing their own bonds.
Yep.
As well.
Yeah.
Just to get an idea of payment structures and that and the like.
Right. And that's important to have when you're trying to figure out where the rates need to be.
Yeah.
At the point where that project is done and they have to start paying that loan back. And
I guess real quick, Liz, I think I'll add one additional thing, and it's with regards to the election. And again, I know we didn't talk much about that process here, but if it is something where there's going to be an election involved, I would say certainly, please, as soon as you're going to start discussing that, have us involved, because we'd like to make sure that bond counsel and the election proceedings are properly done. And the reason I say this is because that we've run into many situations where unfortunately the language put forward for vote is not the best, and it comes back to haunt the city.
Right.
So
yeah, that's a good point, John. Because and recently we've gotten several calls asking, asking Missouri Rural Water if we had templates or sample language for a ballot for a bond issue or some type of a financing issue on the ballot. And my response is no, you need to find a bonding attorney immediately. And your bonding attorney needs to word that language, not the city, you don't need to take an old bond issue and just tweak the language. You call a bonding attorney and you get them on board and you have them write the language. They will make sure everything is done properly. They will make it as broad and as flexible as possible without getting you in trouble on that financing. But at the same time, especially if it's DNR project or private financing project, get your financial advisor involved, such as DA Davidson or whoever that may be at that point, because they can help you get through those hoops and keep you out of trouble through the election process.
That's all we're trying to.
Yeah. So, and systems have gotten in trouble to the point where their bond election was declared null and void, and then they're back to square one. So don't fall into that position. So, okay. Are you seeing with the interest rates going up recently in the last year or so, are financing slowing down? Are you seeing more than one type of financing more than another for projects? What's going on out there in the real world?
We don't see it slowing down.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if anything, more recently it's picking up.
Mhm.
I guess through COVID and with ARPA, things certainly slowed down just because folks were waiting to hear back and see if they got that grant funding.
Right. It's becoming more of a need now than once. And I would say a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good.
Projects are still on the horizon.
Okay. That's good to know. All right. Anybody else have any questions for Brock or John? They're going to be joining us on the roundtable also. So we have a couple of questions that we have answers for. So you want to tune in on the roundtable. But if there's no more questions, we're going to take a short break, like 5 minutes or less, to get our panel in the room and start back up and answer your questions. So be putting your questions in the chat while we're waiting, and we'll be with you in just a few minutes. All right. Okay, we're back for our roundtable. So this is a chance you have to ask your question, and as it's been stated before, to trump the chumps. Is that how we say it?
Stump the Trump.
Strump the trump. Strump the chumps.
Stump the Trumps.
We're gonna
No. Stump the Chumps.
Stump the chumps. We're gonna get that right eventually. Okay. So this is your chance. So on the roundtable, we have to my left, Charlie Zitnick with DA Davidson. And if you don't know Charlie, then I don't know where you've been. David Cheek with USDA Rural Development, and Debbie Feeback with CDBG. And online, we have Stacia Bax with the Department of Natural Resources State Revolving Fund Program. So this is your chance. We've got them all in one place to ask your questions. So just to step back, we had a couple of questions in the chat on previous presentations that we're going to bring up here because we have the answer to. So one of them was about the lead and copper funding. Can you purchase equipment, or is equipment eligible under the SRF program, lead service line replacement, which is a 50% grant, 50% loan? The answer is it could be. The example was, can we buy a vac truck? Maybe. So I would urge you that if that's something you're interested in or something you need, that before you make an application for that, you call the Department of Natural Resources State Revolving Fund, the Financial Assistance Center, talk to Lauren or Sarah, who's the program director, and talk to them about your project, how that equipment would fit in, and then see if it's ineligible. So the answer to that is a strong maybe. Okay. The second question we had was whether federal applicants, federally owned systems are eligible for funding, specifically, I think lead and copper funding, but for funding. And generally, I'll let David answer that for USDA.
Yeah, for USDA, that answer is no. No, federal entities are not eligible for rural development financing.
Okay, so that's kind of what I anticipated. Stacia, do you know for DNR SRF funds, I'm assuming they are not eligible for that?
That's correct. For the typical wastewater type of projects, it would not be eligible.
Okay, and I assume that's true on the drinking water side. Also.
Yes, their eligibilities are a little broader because you could also do private entities, but I do believe that is the same for them as well.
And then block grant, Debbie, do you want to?
Sure. No, they are not eligible for block CDBG. You do have to be a city or a county to make application.
Okay, so that question is pretty much a firm no. You're not eligible for that funding. Now, private. And I assume private market also would be a no because it's the federal government.
More likely than not, no.
Yeah.
That we wouldn't be a funder of federal agency debt.
Okay. All right. Okay. So so that answered those two questions that were in the chat that we got addressed here. Andy, do we have any other questions to start off with, or are we gonna
We do not
go
have
from here?
to
Okay.
chat.
All right, so and again, those of you on the panel, if you just have something to that you want to expand on, don't just feel free to speak up, okay? So Debbie on block grant, just a little more details on the program. So cities and counties are eligible. Water districts and sewer districts are not directly eligible, correct?
Correct.
So can you explain in a little more detail, how would a water district or a sewer district access CDBG funds?
So they would need to get with the city or the county, depending on their location and who the beneficiaries are. And the city or county would have to be the applicant. The water district could be the sub-applicant. And keep in mind that the beneficiaries do also have to be at least 51% of the low to moderate income.
Okay, so they'd have to meet all the other eligibility requirements, but they would apply, the city or the county would apply on their behalf, be the direct applicant to.
Correct.
Correct. All right.
Can I,
Yes, go ahead.
additional questions? Is there a limit to number of times water district or sewer district can apply? Is there a maximum amount of funding? And can they have more than one project going at the same time?
So
And I know that's a mouthful. But
So typically, they have recently changed the maximum amount to 750,000 or 5,000 per household. So it's possible. It just depends on how the application is written, what the project is. It could be possible that maybe there are two projects that are 250,000, but they cannot go over the 750,000 per. And I believe, I would have to double check, but I believe that actually is per project. But typically, it's the scope of work is usually only makes it to where there is only one application. And based on the funding that we would have available, we would look at what applicants we have and where we are with what money is left. And so I suppose it's possible we might be able to consider that, but it would just depend on the project.
and one more just follow on to that. Is there a match or a local funding component or requirement to receive a community development block grant?
Yes, CDBG is only gap funding. And so that is one of the reasons why we require them to go through the MUC committee. And so they have to have other funding partners, which typically would be DNR or USDA rural development.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, very good. So again, a question, and this can be for David and Debbie, probably combined, and Stacia. All of your programs require environmental review process, right?
Correct.
Correct.
So in each of you have your own process to go through for your environmental. But let's say a project gets, since block grant is gap financing, either USDA or DNR is going to be, I'm going to call it the primary financing package, and block grant is going to follow in. Do we have to do 2 environmental reviews, bottom line, or how do you handle that? Because that's always a big issue. So with David or Debbie or Stacia, either one. So
I'll go first, I guess. So rural development has we have a process where many years ago we've worked with CBG, and we actually accept their environmental review. And so we would take that CDBG environmental review, and then we would perform our checks on everything to make sure it has all the correct content and so forth. But no, we have that kind of that partnership with CDBG. So no, you wouldn't have to do 2 environmental reviews if rural development was working in partnership with block grant.
okay.
And the state revolving fund's the same. We would accept CDBG's environmental
Okay,
And CDBG, actually, I mean, I think we all do that. That's one of the benefits of the committee. Because, and we would do the same as David mentioned, is if we were to accept theirs, we make sure that everything is there that meets our requirements.
okay, okay. So that's a good thing. The low to moderate income thing is a big issue, and that's always a big issue when we go visit at myself as an MRWA technical assistance provider. We go and talk to cities about and water districts or whatever about getting a project funded, and then we look at their rates and we say, well, most of the time, your rates aren't to where they need to be in order to be grant eligible. And that's hard to take sometimes, but DNR is using the 2019 census data. Is that correct, Stacia?
Yes, we use the 2019 5-year ACS data currently.
Okay. And David, USDA is still using the 2010 data. Can you, and when is that going to switch? I know you talked about that, but
Yeah, so yeah, right now USDA is still utilizing, we use 2 data sets to determine total grant eligibility. First one is population, of course, of the service area. And so we utilize 2010 census data for population. For the median household income, we utilize the 2006 to 2010 5-year estimate on from the American Community Survey for the median household income. And, you know, I can't say anything for certain because I'm not folks in DC, but the discussion that's out there right now is that they are looking at making a switch over kind of at a natural breaking point. And so that would be October 1st. That's the beginning of the new federal fiscal year.
Mhm.
And so at that point in time, we'll be using 2020 census data. And then I believe it is 2016 through 2020 American Community Survey data. Don't hold me to that one. It might be the 2015 to 2019 ACS. But October 1st is kind of the date they've talked about.
okay. And those income levels are going to be higher than the previous stuff. So your MHI is going to be higher, and
Yeah,
that can impact your rate eligibility and that type of thing. And are you guys using you have the 51% LMI requirement, which is a
Right.
little bit different, but are you using the current census data?
We are not. We're still using the 2010, and we change when HUD lets us change. So
Okay.
we wait until we get notification from them that it is time to switch over, which we have not gotten yet, as far as I know.
Okay. So that gets a little confusing. Charlie?
Just to maybe add to what you started this questioning off with, Liz, the frustration that the field staff of MRWA has, as well as the grant and loan agencies, is that the first thing they look at is what are your user rates, and if your user rates aren't where they need to be with respect to either the LMI or let's see, you're 1% or 2% on
2%.
2%.
If they're not 2% of the average income, then before you get grant money, they're going to require that you raise your rates. Well, if you raise your rates to where they need to be, oftentimes that gets rid of the need for grant funding. So you're kind of needing to always keep your rates in line with your income levels in your district or in your community. And then the decision is going to be made whether you get grant money or not.
And that's a good point. Yeah, we have this discussion with systems all the time about you need to be raising your rates. And I think David also pointed this out in his application and his presentation that, not raising rates for 5 to 10 years is not a good thing. You need to be raising them a little bit, almost probably every year. And I tell systems that you need to have a rate study done
every 2 to 3 years at least, and keep those rates up and keep them current, because when you do go out for funding, like Charlie said, they're going to expect you to be at 2%. And when you raise it up there, you're going to be able to make that loan payment for a bigger loan and not need a grant. So
One
go ahead, Stacia.
one clarification for the state revolving fund programs, both the drinking water and the clean water. We don't require you to be at 2%. We have a tiered system, so you get some points if your rate is at a certain level. Obviously, you get more points the higher percentage you are in that category. So that's what we base ours on.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Great clarification. So
Going back, maybe a topic, there was a question, can either CDBG or Green Hills be hired to do the environmental review?
that's
Let's jump back a little bit.
Yeah, so it depends on the project. Now, CDBG cannot be, but depending on, depending on the project, but typically they go out to bid for whoever their administrator is. But we don't typically do the environmental review for you. We review the environmental reviews that come in.
And on an annual basis, CDBG provides administrator training, and whether it's going through a private consultant or through a regional planning commission, either one can do the environmental. And to what Debbie's point, that typically it's a solicitation process to get an administrator under contract, be that a regional planning commission or a private administrator.
right.
Liz, I would like to add one thing, unless Andy, do we have more questions?
Go ahead and add to that.
So, well, it's kind of something that I wanted to touch on as well. In Davidson's presentation, the case study they kind of talked about was what was it? The state of euphoria.
State of anxiety.
There you go.
City of
So one thing that I noticed that really stood out, and this is just going to be a recommendation from rural development, more than a mandate or a rule necessarily, but they said that that the state of city of euphoria had gone out and had a bond election, and that they actually were forward thinking, and they decided to go ahead and try to get 1.5% or 150%, 1.5 times 150% of the project, elect that for bonds. And so one thing that we like to highly encourage folks, applicants with rural development, is to please make sure you're looking at that. That's a very good idea, very forward thinking, because you might have had your bond election a number of years ago, and these projects take time. And so, as we've seen, unfortunately, in the last just 3 years, the escalation of construction prices has been really, really astronomical. And so we've ran into some issues with this. So our rule of thumb, we like to say is, if our staff is out engaging with customers, is if you're going to do a bond election, we really encourage you to do at least 1.5 to 2 times the total project cost, not just what construction might be, total project cost. So that's going to include your soft costs as well, your engineering fees, your legal fees, bond counsel fees, because that just prepares everybody in case we get into a situation where bids would come in high, because then we would at least be able to react to a potential subsequent funding request to keep things moving. Otherwise, if you run out of bonding capacity, then that project is dead in the water as far as the funding agency is concerned, as far as how we would move forward until such time as there's more security available.
Right. That's a good point. And that has happened before, like you said, that We've seen that happen. And that's why it's really important to get, when you're looking at the project and the financing, and you've decided that you're gonna put a ballot, an issue on the ballot, make sure your bonding attorneys are there, make sure your financial advisor is there, because they can help you determine that level and for what you need to go out with. So there's people there to help you, and I can't emphasize that enough. Don't try to do this in-house. You know, there's people that can help you, and you need to do that. So do we have a question, Andy?
Couple more questions. The first one I think would probably be for Stacia. Is SRF funding using 2010 HMI for this year's application?
No, we are using 2019 still. The 2020 decennial census does not come out till about May. And we've looked at the 2020 and 2021 ACS data, and 2020 did not show, it had some data inconsistencies. And then the 2021 we haven't processed yet, so we're not ready to use it. So we're still using the 2019 ACS.
Thank you. Okay. Then there's another question. Is there a cost to have a rate study done?
Is there a cost to have a rate study done by Missouri Rural Water Association? I'm assuming is the question.
Just kind of an open-ended question.
Okay, no, we do not charge for rate studies. I will tell you though, that if you're interested in having a rate study done, you need to contact us immediately, because we have a list and it's going to be a little while before we can get to you. So if that's something that you're wanting to do, don't put it off. You need to get on the list, because we get requests every week for rate studies, and there's like 2 of us doing it, and we have other things too. So there's going to be a time lapse to get to you. So don't hesitate.
Another question. Can money from a lead service line grant be used to pay your own employees to complete the inventory?
Generally speaking, from SRF, no, I don't believe that's true. At least for historically speaking, the lead service line grant is a little bit of a different beast. I do know there's additional information coming out very shortly on that, and the details will be outlined then. I can definitely bring that back from whoever asked that and get a final answer, but that's the best I know.
Okay, so are they asking so to clarify the question, are they asking about, they got an ARPA grant to do lead service line? Can they use the ARPA grant to pay for their employees? Or are they talking about if we apply to SRF for SRF lead copper, that's the 50% grant, 50% loan, can we pay our, I mean, that's 2 different questions, right?
Hey,
so we need to know which funding packet are they talking about?
Anita, can you go ahead and unmute your microphone? Oh, they haven't received the money, just in the future.
In the future. So they're talking about, Stacia, that's a question for you then. So yeah, so we will get that information from Stacia when she's got a chance to research that. So, okay. Very good. Any other questions from our participants?
None right at the moment.
Okay. Anything here from the panel? Of
course, I've got.
Okay, Charlie.
My final takeaway, and for all of you that know us and know MRWA, when you're looking at doing a project, pull your working group together very early. You're not incurring costs to do so, and you're probably preventing headaches down the road. And whether it's going conventional financing, commercial financing, USDA, CDBG, Department of Natural Resources, get everybody to the table as early as possible to look at what your options are. And to go back to what Liz was talking about with respect to your bond election, it's critical that the language be drafted correctly and the proceedings be properly filed. And for whatever reason, and I've been doing this 30-something years, in the last 3 years or so, we have seen any number of ballot initiatives where bonds were voted and passed, or sales tax were voted and passed, but the Department of Revenue has then rejected the issue because the language on the ballot was incorrectly written. And here would be, if there's a bond attorney listening in, they're probably not going to appreciate what I'm going to say. But if you write your own ballot language and it's wrong, there's nobody there to fix it. If you have bond counsel write your ballot language, they'll fight it to get it fixed if it was wrong in the first place. And candidly, I've never seen a public interest law firm write incorrect ballot language. They follow the state language verbatim, so it's always correct. There's no creativity when they come to scribing ballot initiatives. So point being, just call all of your working group in as early as possible to meet with you and your engineer and just start the process rolling.
That's a good point. Yeah, very critical. To take that a step further, when I talk about project financing for a small system, especially at the system level, have one person that's in charge of this. Okay, don't assume that the council is going to take care of it, but have one person, either a staff person or the mayor or one of the councilmen, it doesn't matter, but one person who's going to be the central point of contact, who can be contacting these players, right? Your bond counsel, your financial advisor, engineer, your attorney, to make sure they're doing their job, and that they have one point of contact with the system to get things done. I have seen systems, projects where nobody knew who to contact, and so everybody thought everybody else was doing something and nobody was doing anything, and the project languished on for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years before it finally went to bid. Well, by that time, guess what happens? You go to bid and you don't have enough money, right?
Yeah.
You don't have bonding authority, your grants aren't going to cover it. But there was nobody at the system tracking it, being the central point of contact, and that is critical also. So whoever that person is, figure that out early.
Well, and of course, that makes me think of something else to add, and I'm going to take a little bit of David's thunder, and I don't know about state revolving fund, but USDA, after 5 years of inactivity on a project, can deobligate funds. Meaning, if you've got your letter of conditions and you've got funds obligated by USDA, am I right, David, on 5 years? That, and maybe it's even shorter, but you at some point, I don't know if you've ever dropped that kind of hammer, you can say done.
Yeah, absolutely. We have that ability to do that. 5 years is the magic number that our national office does really start looking super hard at things, and so that is just that much more reason to, as Liz mentioned, is somebody needs to be the champion of the project, because if nobody has working points or things that that they're responsible for, they can be held accountable for, then it's very, very possible, and it happens all the time, where you think somebody else is doing something, nobody's doing anything, like Liz said. And so USDA rural development does have the option to deobligate the money, take it away, and it's just done if there isn't a process, if things aren't moving. So
yeah. Stacia, do you guys have a general time frame for SRF projects that just aren't proceeding on when you?
Yeah, our projects are put on an intended use plan and a project priority list, and they're on that list for 2 years. After that, unless they reapply, they would fall off.
Okay. Have you ever had a project on the IUP that, well, I guess you wouldn't get to the point of issuing bonds or anything,
I mean, we've had,
Call off the IUP, wouldn't they? And then.
yeah,
Also
if there's
funding.
disinterest or if the community decides to withdraw, they can write us a letter to actually withdraw or just wait for that 2-year period to end and they would just drop off. We've had a number of projects on our intended use plan for a good number of years. So as long as they're progressing, we still work with them. But if there is lack of activity after that period of time, they will fall off the IUP.
Okay. So yeah, I like the term David used. You need to find a champion for your project at the local level that can be the focal point at the local level where these your financing team can work with. So that's critical. So
Liz,
okay. Go ahead.
I would like to, these are just things that are coming to mind that maybe folks should know. Clearly they've logged in to learn more about the process. And so, we do it every day, right? And so maybe some of the audience may only do one project in their tenure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I just thought about this. Don't be afraid to engage different counsel. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, and this isn't any hit on maybe your normal city attorney or your normal water district attorney. Water district is maybe a little bit different because they deal with the workings of the water district, but maybe a municipality's normal kind of attorney they have on retainer that's handling some of your your city, just your normal everyday city business and your ordinances and whatever, that just may not be their specialty. Water and sewer and multi-million-dollar construction projects, contract negotiate or contract arbitration or if litigation, hopefully that never happens, but there are folks out there that have different specialties. So that is something that we do see as well from time to time, is that you may still have your own city attorney, but also you brought in a special counsel for a project such as this.
Right. Yeah. Because there are several unique aspects to a big construction project that need to be considered. So that's a good point. Okay. Anything else?
You want to talk about?
Oh, I could go on all day, but I'm going to stop.
You want to talk about
Baba, that's a good point. Yes, David brought up something that. Oh yeah. Okay. So yes, we need to talk about Baba. Those of you.
And I want to talk about Baba.
Okay.
We probably need to talk about.
Okay. So I'm going to let David talk about Baba because I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but maybe not. So explain what Baba is and how it affects project, and then how you implement that. So
I'm going to be very measured this morning here, still this morning, on what I say, just because it is so new to rural development. But the Build America, Buy America Act, also known as BABA, technically it was included in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which was passed, I want to say, or signed into law in November of 2021.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And BABA, the Build America, Buy America Act, technically went into effect in May 14th of 2022. USDA Rural Development has had a BABA implementation waiver in place to kind of allow our, the whole USDA Rural Development, because this is not just Missouri, this is a federal government wide initiative. But that 6 month we had an implementation waiver in place. That implementation waiver expired February 3rd of 23. So what that means to new projects, okay, if you did not have an obligation in place prior to February 3rd of 23, any new projects. So for any of you watching out there, I'm not going to get into existing obligations, existing letters of condition. I'm not going to get into any of that right now. But for any of you watching that have projects that you need to do, BABA, Build America, Buy America Act regulations will be, will have to be included in any bid specifications that go out. And it's all about domestic production, domestic preference on products and infrastructure projects in general that are funded by federal funds. And so that is something that everybody needs to be aware of. We're really unclear at this time how it's going to affect projects as far as money, how much money or how much time it's going to affect projects because we haven't done any yet. I mean, we just haven't. So, but it is something to be aware of. There will be more information forthcoming. And I would imagine, over the next year or so, there probably will continue to be, additional guidance, additional information coming out of, your federal funding partners and at least USDA rural development. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay.
That's a new thing, and it's it's definitely something that will have some sort of impact on projects.
Okay. Stacia, are you guys talking about BABA on
Yes.
your funding?
BABA also applies to the SRF funding. Our equivalency projects, which is our direct capitalization grant from EPA, that portion of the funding and our grants do have ties into BABA. Currently, we do have a adjustment period waiver, similar to what USDA Rural Development had. Ours was based on planning activities. So if you had certain level of planning activities done prior to May 14, 2022, then that waiver applies. So there still could be some new applications that come through that had planning done prior to that could still apply under the waiver. So there is some flexibility there with that. But either way, whether you have BABA apply, which applies to a good portion of construction materials and your iron and steel, if there is a waiver of BABA, the American Iron and Steel, which the SRF program has implemented for about 8 or so years, still applies.
Okay.
So we still have that requirement regardless of BABA waivers or not.
Okay. Does USDA have the iron and steel
Yes.
issue?
Yeah,
So
because they're they're extremely similar in that, in one aspect that they want everything to be manufactured, in the United States. But they are two separate acts, and they both will apply to they're largely overlapping, but they will both apply to USDA rural development funded projects.
Okay. So Debbie, CDBG, are you guys looking at BABA for your funding?
So we are still gathering all of the information. Of course, again, we follow everything that HUD guides us to follow. But what I do know is that our fiscal year 22 grant agreement was signed before this went into effect. So it will not go into effect until our fiscal year 23. And like everybody, it's new, so we're still trying to work our way through it. But with the grant agreement signed before, we don't have to worry about that until 23.
Okay. So it has the potential to impact your project cost. It probably will impact your project cost. Something your engineers definitely need to be very aware of. And I'm going to assume most of your engineers are aware of this, because it's gonna impact the bid specs that they put together.
Right,
So,
it's going to impact the bid specs, the engineer, some of the work the engineers will have to do, some of the certifications the engineers may have to make. Even the contractors may have to make some certifications on the supplies that they are getting. So
yeah,
it's a pretty broad, pretty far-reaching legislation. So
yeah. Okay. All right. Andy, do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, I think we're good then. I don't have any other questions unless anybody on the panel has any last final words of wisdom.
not for me.
No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for participating. We appreciate your time. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. And Andy did record this, so at some point it will be available for you to watch. And I'm sure that'll be in the e-newsletter announcement when it's available. But between now and then, good luck on your project financing. And if there's anything Missouri Rural Water can help you with, please call and let us know.